Who we missing? Yeah. Dick's doing call of the house. Let me give people a chance to get in here. Ladies and gentlemen, Wyoming has one representative in the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress. There are 433 other representatives. Unbeknownst to them, this woman has them surrounded. It's my honor and privilege to welcome Representative Harriet Hageman to the Wyoming Legislature. Prior to be elected to Congress, she worked as a water, natural resource, and constitutional attorney. She now serves on the Judiciary and Natural Resources Committees. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Hageman.
Thank you. Hageman. Long. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's interesting, as many of you know, I've spent an awful lot of time in this Capitol building, and this is the first time I've ever been on the floor of the Senate. I obviously spent a lot of time in the other chamber with my father, who was there for 24 years, and then with many of you who are in this room who started over there. So it's wonderful to be here, to be in this beautiful, beautiful room, and to see so many old friends as well as new friends, and I know people that I will be happy to work with over the next couple of years as I represent the state of Wyoming back in Washington, D.C. I know that many of you probably watched what happened a couple of weeks ago in terms of our efforts to elect a Speaker of the House. And there was an awful lot of press about that. It seemed that it was must-watch TV for many people. I know people said that they stayed up late at night, and they were right there with us when we were sworn in at 1:41 in the morning on January 7th. And there were some people who thought that seemed to be somewhat of a messy process. And we would get texts and say, you need to stop this. You need to get the speaker elected and move forward. I was very pleased with how things went. I actually was someone who supported the process as it played out. I think that it is good to have debate. It is good to have discussion. And it has been a long time since that body actually debated and discussed the issues and fought over the things that are important to us here in this country. The things that we were working on related to changing the rules of how we're going to be looking at legislation and how we change Washington, D.C. And while I supported Kevin McCarthy on all 15 votes, there was a lot of strategy as to why I was doing that. There were 20 folks who were, well, not quite 20. There were some of the people, most specifically, Scott Perry and Chip Roy from Texas were the two primary people who were negotiating on some of the rule changes. Several of the changes McCarthy had committed to even before the entire process started. And it was one of the reasons why I committed to supporting him, because he is making that chamber much more workable and much more representative, if you will, of the American people. Some of the changes that we got in those rules include that we get a guaranteed minimum of 72 hours to review legislation before voting on it. As you saw from the omnibus spending bill that went through in December, as you've seen with other bills, that's not a rule that's been in place for quite some time. The other thing is that we can amend bills on the floor. That's something that has been shut down essentially since John Boehner. They have not allowed people to make amendments on the floor. That was an extremely important rule change that many of us wanted and that we had negotiated with Mr. McCarthy before January 3rd. We also got more conservative members on the Rules Committee. So as we move forward with bills, there are going to be representatives, the conservative representatives on there to fight for us to make sure that we're getting good legislation through. We got incredible reforms to the budget process and mandatory spending programs, and we also are going to return to regular order where we're going to be taking up all 12 spending bills, and we're not going to be doing, we have put rules in place to make it extremely difficult to do any more of those omnibus spending bills like the $1.7 trillion monstrosity that was just passed in December. But some of the other things that I think that were very important to me, one of the most important ones was that there were two subcommittees created through this process. One of them is a subcommittee that is a select committee on the strategic competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. So we're going to be looking at everything from manufacturing to social media influences, and we're going to look at every aspect of our relationship with China. So many people recognize the threat that China poses to the United States, and there's going to be a select committee with some excellent members digging into more of what China has been doing. But the one that was the most important to me was we created a select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government. And why this one is so important is, as a constitutional attorney, I believe that the First Amendment is one of the most important amendments setting forth our civil rights, our personal natural rights that we have in this country that sets us apart from so many other countries around the world. And we have seen some real attacks on the First Amendment over the last couple of years related to COVID, related to elections, and a lot of different things. So that subcommittee is going to be placed within the Judiciary Committee. I am hoping that I will be on that subcommittee. But if not, I am on the Judiciary Committee, and we are going to be going forward with a variety of investigations that I'm sure you've been reading about. I'm very excited about the prospect of digging into what has been going on with the FBI, the NIH, and these various agencies that have been weaponized. I also have been involved for quite some time with a lawsuit related to the Missouri and Louisiana lawsuit against Fauci and the NIH and their involvement with the social media companies suppressing information during the COVID pandemic. So I'm looking forward to getting more information in that regard and actually exposing this. I believe that sunshine is the best disinfectant, and I think it's absolutely critical that we get to the bottom of what has been happening the last couple of years with several of our agencies, and most specifically some of our law enforcement agencies. I have been also working on sponsoring or co-sponsoring bills already. I have co-sponsored the REINS Act, and I'm also intending to introduce a subset of a different bill than that related to forcing Congress, or actually taking power away from unelected bureaucrats and forcing Congress to do its job. I have been a co-sponsor on the Permitting for Mining Needs Act, the VA Same-Day Scheduling Act, which makes sure that our veterans are able to access health care, the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act, the Border Safety and Security Act. I also am proposing an amendment to the Constitution to keep the Supreme Court justices at 9, terminating the COVID-19 national emergency, and 2 bills which would prevent the Biden administration from banning gas stoves. We all saw how that played out over the last couple of weeks. In closing, one of the more interesting meetings that I've had the opportunity to participate in while I was back in Washington, D.C. took place just last week. And we had a gentleman from the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, come and give us a briefing on what is going on in the fiscal situation in the United States. And the reason it was fascinating is because he gave us a lot of information that we either don't hear, don't necessarily understand, or is not presented in the same way for us to really dig into what is this situation. And I'm going to tell you, it's dire. It is terribly dire. We are looking at $32 trillion in debt before too long. With the inflation that we are experiencing, with the high gas prices and the failed policies of the current administration, our fiscal outlook is not good. The federal government is going to have to cut spending. It is that simple. Within a very short period of time, the vast majority of the federal budget is going to pay for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the debt. There isn't much money out there, and continuing to print money and deficit spend has covered up a lot of very terrible policies in this country, but we're running out of runway. So what I want to say is how proud I am to come from a state like Wyoming, where I know people like you are here representing your constituents, representing me, representing my fellow Wyomingites, as you attempt to navigate the difficult situations we're dealing with nationally, internationally, and right here in the state of Wyoming. You all understand the importance of being self-sufficient. You understand the importance of protecting our legacy industries. You understand the importance of being fiscally responsible. And so what I will say is I will fight with everything that I have against the runaway spending you see in the federal government. But the reality is that regardless of what we even do in that regard, we're running up against a brick fence. So you need to be independent. You need to make sure that Wyoming is living within its means. You need to pass an appropriate and responsible budget because the federal government isn't going to be here to bail us out. The amount of spending that has been going on, the inflation, so much of that can be laid at the feet of the federal government, and it is not doing right by the citizens of this great country. So again, I talk about Wyoming all the time. Every day I invite people to my beautiful state. I talk about what we do. I talk about what we have. I talk about our mining and our oil and gas, our trona, the resources that we have to feed the world, to provide energy to the world. And I'm going to fight for those industries and for those issues while I'm back in Congress. But again, knowing that you're here and that you're doing what you do, that gives me a lot of support. I appreciate everything that you do here. Thank you for your service and thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
Go ahead and go out this way so they all get a chance to shake your hand.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your service to the state of Wyoming, Harriet. Harriet. So are we looking for privilege of the floor? Privilege of the floor, Senator Hutchings.
Quickly, I don't know if you realize it, but when we have a speaker there, that lamp allows us only to see the top of their head and maybe this much of their body. So maybe for the people on this side of the room, from Senator Barlow over, maybe we can move that lamp when we have a speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So ordered.
Yay! Yay!
We'll figure out
Princess,
something.
everybody. Yeah. You scare me when we have the
I
same
did
thoughts.
earlier, but I can do it again.
Because she's over there.
All right, Senate's called to order.
Thank you.
One other announcement, I wanted to follow up with CSG. You can go to csgwest.org and get a list of the committees. If you're interested in serving on any of those committees, they're listed there, and you just contact your Senate president if you'd like to serve on any of them. And there are some people in here serving on those committees. I don't know who they are, but just ask around so you can get their take on that service. And then they have a new legislators training program for people that are in their first 4 years of service. I've not been to it. I'm beyond remediation, but I understand those that have gone have always been very enthusiastic about it. So those of you in your first 4 years of service, you might ask around for others that have gone and make your own assessment as to whether that's going to be a good use of your time. All right, we have messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, January 18, 2023, message number 109. Mr. President, the following bills passed the House on third reading in an amended form by the votes indicated. House Bill number 42, off-road recreational vehicle operation, ayes 56, noes 5, excused 1. Message number 110, January 18, 2023. House Bill number 61, source material associated with mining agreement, ayes 60, excused 2. Signed, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Thank you. Reports from standing committees.
January 18, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 2 Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 118, Fund Balance Calculations, Federal Encumbrances Excluded. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 18, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred Senate File 94, Federal Indian Child Welfare Act Codification. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. January 17, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 96, Omnibus Water Bill, Planning and Administration. Respectfully report same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we are at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file. Oh, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. While we're still in the Senate committee, I would request that Senate File 96 Omnibus Water Planning be re-referred to Committee number 2 Appropriations.
So ordered. Any others? All right, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Vice President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senator McEwen.
Committee of the Whole, please come to order. First bill for consideration is Senate File 91. The reading clerk will read the Senate file.
Senate File 91, Creation of Tenancy by the Entirety, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to property, conveyances, and security transactions. Was referred to Committee number 1, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senator Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Landon?
There we go. Green means go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really appreciate that. I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a do pass recommendation on Senate File 91, creation of tenancy by the entirety. For an explanation of the bill, I would like to call on the good senator from Laramie County, the sponsor of the bill, for a look at this good little Senate file. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good senators, you have before you a good little bill that is intending to codify Wyoming Supreme Court precedent and how we currently operate with our understanding of when a deed designates property ownership as husband and wife, that in fact does create a tenancy by the entirety, which means that you own that property entirety with your spouse, and if one of you were to pass, the other would inherit that property or receive that property. Likely your understanding of how your ownership on your homes work with your spouses, and more likely than not, that is what your deeds actually state. There was some confusion in the federal court interpreting our laws concerning this issue in 2019. And so this bill is just attempting to close that little loophole that was opened by that case law and codify Wyoming's practice and most states' practice relating to when a deed states husband and wife, that you own that by tenants by the entirety, likely with rights of survivorship. So with that, I'd stand for questions and ask for your favorable consideration.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'm reluctant to stand up and expose my ignorance, but frankly, I didn't understand the explanation at all. And don't understand what the tenancy by entireties means as a practical matter. And would have a question, suppose somebody remarries later in life, and each spouse has children that they want to eventually to to inherit, does this make all their property common? Does it make some of their property common? Mr. Chairman, I frankly do not understand the implications of this bill. So I'm asking for some more explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question is, does this eliminate the need for wills and trusts designating property for the spouse? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great questions, and my apologies to the good senator from Bates Creek for a poor explanation of the bill. Kind of backtrack a little bit on how property is held in the United States and our cousins across the pond. And there are multiple ways to own real property, which means land or houses, which most of you in this room likely do. You and I can own property together. One of you and I can. We're not married, right? But we can own it. And if I were to die, you still would own that, and my heirs would own my portion of it in half. And that's called tenancy in common. But American law provides protections to those that have the legal protection of marriage, husband and wife. And so most of you acquired your homes with your spouses, and that spouse says, John and Susie Smith, husband and wife. And it has no designation for tenancy by the entirety. It just says John and Susie Smith, husband and wife. That's how we've always done things in this country. And when it says husband and wife, historically, for hundreds of years, when one of those spouses died, the other spouse inherited that property entirely. They were the sole owner of it. This bill is codifying that practice. In 2019, there was a federal case that was interpreting unrelated issues where they called into question whether or not that really was what Wyoming was intending to do. Interestingly enough, the federal court called out the statutory section 34.1.140, which is in your bill draft. And if you read subsection A does not expressly allow for the creation of a tenancy by the entirety by designating just husband and wife. And the court thought that might indicate legislative intent, that we were not suggesting that husband and wife would mean that you would own that property by tenancy in the entirety. And it's really important that that continues. And so we are clarifying for future judicial interpretations for all those deeds out there that exist that say husband and wife, that you do actually own that property as tenancy in the entirety. So if your spouse passes, you will receive that. It is not intended to avoid the need for estate planning attorneys or probate, but in some ways it does, but that's a bigger issue. But this is not what this bill is intending to do, just intending to clarify the practice of which you understand the way your property is likely held with your spouses.
Landon's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 91, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Senate File 91 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 66.
Senate File 66, School Capital Construction Funding, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee, an act relating to school finance accounts, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Kinski, right? Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 66, and it is my pleasure to be able to present this to you on behalf of the Joint Appropriations Committee. If you would check your box, your inbox, everybody should have a red and black handout showing a flow chart. And this is an explanation of the bill. So I'll walk you through the flow chart, as the bill is a little bit tough to follow without already knowing what you're looking at. The purpose of this bill is part of the continuing effort by your Appropriations Committee and your Capital Finance to simplify our chart of accounts, and in so doing, make them more transparent, and also to get higher rates of return by trying to get all these various coffee cans consolidated. So let's start here with some of the coffee cans that we have. There's something called, you'll see in the first box, SCCA. That's the School Capital Construction Account. And this is used to build schools, and it's used for major maintenance on schools. You'll see above the revenue sources, federal mineral royalties and coal-lease bonuses. You'll see that the coal-lease bonuses are 0 and 0, and we don't anticipate any for quite a while. But when we did have them, these federal mineral royalties and the bonuses would go into the School Capital Construction Account and fund all that construction. Well, with the diminution of the coal-lease bonuses, there's never enough money in the School Capital Construction Account to do what needs to be done. We end up funding it out of the general fund or out of the Legislative Stabilization Reserve. So there's really, I don't know that there was ever a need for this account, but we're just going to get rid of it and flow that revenue source, federal mineral royalties, directly to the School Foundation Program, which is the checkbook. That's the checkbook. We're trying to get to one checkbook, one savings account. The next column, revenue sources. This is 33% of state royalties, and this is by constitution, a third of state royalties go to the schools. And you'll see 40 million, 39 million. That historically has gone to the state land minerals royalties account and then to the School Foundation Program. We just cut out the middleman. We're going to put the money right into the School Foundation account. The next column, the revenue source, is and if this is confusing, that's why we want the bill. Clear all this up. It took 5 years to be able to get the acronyms down. The Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund is the trust fund that was established by the voters in '75 that the severance taxes go into, that is inviolate. It spins off earnings. So it spins off a spending policy for us of 5%, and we currently say 1.25% of that 5% is to go to this SIPA account, which is Strategic Investments Project Account, which started 2 administrations ago. The original theory is it's going to be used to do these great infrastructure things that'll help build our economic future, and it morphed over time into building state buildings and various other projects. SIPA, it's called. And then somewhere along the line, because schools were getting short, it was deemed, let's just take 45% of that 1.25% and direct it to the School Major Maintenance Fund, which is, you see, SMMS. We're just going to eliminate that. So now the SIPA is the SIPA. What you're left with, you see at the bottom, is one account, the School Foundation Program, additional revenues from the repeal of the SCCA, the SLMRA, and the SMMS. In 2025, that'll be 87.3 million, which includes the balance of the School Capital Construction Account. In 2026, that'd be 44 million. And then you'll see off to the right, it says any reversions that will be forthcoming from those accounts will get directed back into the school foundation program. So instead of having all these various coffee cans, all these various buckets and accounts, we're just gonna have one checking account, the school foundation program. That's gonna build the schools. That's gonna do the major maintenance on the schools. That's gonna fund K-12. And when it's short, we know exactly how much we have to write a check for out of the general fund to make sure that K-12 remains solvent. So, and you'll see that at the very bottom in red, appropriations for K-12 school operations, major maintenance, and capital construction. So this is part of, you've heard various of us in this body that have been here a while commit to you that we are going to try and make our finances simpler to understand, more transparent. And this is part of that effort. It should not be that you have to understand SSCA, SLRMA, and SMMS, and SIPA to understand what the SFP is all about. And this, so that's what this bill does. And I'll stand for questions. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to back up my good chairman and a real simplified understanding of the bill or concerns about what the bill may or may not do, it's important to recognize that this bill does not add or remove money for school capital construction. It really is just consolidating the accounts that fund it already for purposes of ease of accounting and bookkeeping and really just consolidating that money into one account. So it's not adding or removing money, and there's no consequence on that front. It really is just a more streamlined, efficient accounting practice. And a little bit of background on that, you might see that we've heard our leadership say, for those of us who've been in the Senate for years, the need to kind of disentangle some of these accounts because they become so complicated. And looking at the budget over time, I think what we see is there's a very simplified budget, or financial accounts, and then ideas come forward to create an account for a specific project, and then they continue to grow and grow and grow. And then we kind of go through this cycle of then the need to unwind some of those accounts and simplify things again. So in the arc of budgeting and government budgeting and state budgeting, we're in that time of needing to simplify. And likely what will happen is my prediction once we're all gone is there will be many more coffee cans once again, and there will be the need to simplify. But right now where we are in our budget is the need to simplify and remove some of those coffee cans.
Senator Rothfuss.
I'll go ahead.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually am fine with the bill. I think it's a good effort. I only have, the one pause that I would have, having served on your School Facilities Committee for the past decade, is simply the concern that one of the first things to go in an operation is the maintenance piece. The fact is, Mr. Chairman, we own over 25 million square feet of buildings out across Wyoming. And today we're not taking care of them to the tune that is recommended already. So now what we're going to do is we're not going to even set aside an account that we pay attention to, that we know that we have to spend money on. So that's my only pause, and I wonder if that conversation took place in our Appropriations Committee. Is there any concern that this major maintenance piece is just gonna just kind of fade into the woodworks or be shorted in any way? One of the worst things we can do as a pretty conservative guy, I think it's very important that we take care of what we have. And so that's my only pause. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great concern. We do have, the committee did hear a number of concerns presented regarding stabilized funding for our schools, including major maintenance for all of the schools across our state. something that the Appropriations Committee and all of us in the legislature are committed to solving, is providing those dedicated and reliable funding streams. But of course, as we all know, Wyoming lacks that fundamentally. But this bill is intending to assist in that concern by providing one account with a clear amount of funding in it to provide a clarity to both the public and to the appropriators and to this body as to the amount of money we do have for major maintenance, so that we really can come up with reasonable solutions for what our spending policy and our investment policy should be associated with those major maintenance accounts, knowing the need to preserve and protect those buildings so we can maximize the taxpayers' dollars for the state of Wyoming.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, let me say that I have very strongly mixed feelings about this bill. We have a problem, but let me start out saying I share the concern over the major maintenance, and I have seen the problem in the school area in the days before the Campbell decision, when the larger districts were discriminated against pretty heavily. My school district sacrificed major maintenance on its school buildings to quite an extent so it could have adequate funds to pay the teachers. And hard to disagree with their analysis as to what was immediately important. They were simply in trouble and dealt with it that way. And so I think the fear that major maintenance will get ignored is quite valid. And that's something we're going to have to guard against. That's not my principal concern. I think this may be, it's good to simplify things so we can see what we're doing. And that part of the bill is, that feature of the bill is commendable. We have, getting to the capital construction, Mr. Chairman, we have a major problem. We had a funding source that made the previous system function over the years. I think seeing what's gone on around the state, we can say we probably spent more than we should have, probably by a good deal. But the state worked and could finance it, but the source of revenue dried up. We have tried some systems to try to fix it. The other house wouldn't even hear the bill. Well, they heard it in committee and with a preordained instruction to kill it, and they did. We've got to do something different. And this bill does. It says it's going to come out of the funds that fund the operating too. And let me express a deep fear as chairman of your education committee that the net result of that over time, we don't do some radical things, is that we are going to continue to build palaces around the state at the expense of not doing an adequate job of instruction within those palaces, the shortage of money. I don't think currently shortage of money is a problem in the school operating sense. I have some quarrel with some of the ways the districts are allocating what they've got, but I think they've got plenty. They're in good shape. I think you can even make a pretty good argument, and the Senate has made that argument, that they're currently overfunded. If you think schools that are operating as overfunded, this bill will cure that in a hurry. They have to compete against capital construction. It is my fear that what we're going to do is slight the operating side of the house and continue to build way more than we need to. And if that happens, Mr. Chairman, this bill will go down as one of the worst we have passed. But we have been unable to make progress with seeing that we've got a real problem and we've got to solve it. And I don't know where you're going to find another source, current funding, other than just say we're going to take it out of the general fund. But the net effect will be the same. We'll be spending money there too. So, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm going to vote against this bill. I think it may be a current necessity, but I don't like it as a long-term solution because I think it will lead us to underfund the operating, and that is so much more important than the school facilities. Frankly, I think we can get by with pretty inferior facilities if the quality of instruction, if the quality of the management of the school districts is good. We can get by with inferior facilities. I think that's much more important than facilities. And this bill really worries me.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate these efforts and appreciate trying to create a better flow and transparency and honestly getting to the point where we have better ability to invest funds that we're holding. So there's a lot of upside to the strategy here. Mr. Chairman, the one concern I have, though, is the practical implication of what happens with what is over there on the right, the SMMS, which is a relatively new fund. The School Major Maintenance Sub-Account of the SIPA was created just a few years ago as a means of patching the hole that we just heard about on major maintenance and providing revenue over to the SCCA, the School Capital Construction Account, specifically for major maintenance, because we didn't have a way to pay for major maintenance. And so what ends up happening there effectively is that you have Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund revenue that's going into the SIPA, so this is general fund side, was being transferred over to the capital construction side to cover the obligations for capital construction, and those are necessary obligations. So the concern I have with this proposal is that it then, and I'm not entirely sure when this goes to effect, so that'll be a question I have, is when will what I'm about to say happen? But it's about a $50-ish million, and I think that's what we see there. Yep, fiscal year 2025, $50.3 million. Fiscal year 2026, $52.1 million. Those funds would be going over to cover major maintenance, or a portion of it, where major maintenance is larger than that rather substantially, but it's part of the patch. So when would those funds stop moving over if we pass this bill? And what will we use instead? Or is the intent simply to appropriate out of the general fund side? And if that is the case, I do grow concerned with the idea that each year then I know this body and will basically just be further shorting major maintenance based on the way that I see this body behave unless there's a dedicated revenue stream. If it's a choice between taking $50 million in general funds to pay for major maintenance or to short major maintenance, I've really never seen a circumstance in my 12 years where we haven't shorted major maintenance. So why would we do better in the future if we make this change?
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the floor, we spend too much darn money on schools. We don't spend enough on schools. We spend too much on major maintenance. We've been shorting major maintenance for years. How do you know? How do you know? If we wanted to play a little game today, a little parlor game, take a piece of paper off your desk. Don't put your name on it. Write how much more or how much less do you think we're spending on schools than we should? Fold it sometime between now and midnight tonight. Drop it off on my desk. Don't put your name on it. I'll add them all up, divide it by 31, and let you know the number. Because I don't think we do know, and that's the point of this bill. The point of this bill is to try to get a handle on that. Now, you could go to your goldenrod and find the answer. The answer is there. I want to try, you can do that, use this on your sheet of paper if you want, and you can't find the answer. I dare you to try. The half a dozen people in this room who know it, and I don't count myself in that group, but a half a dozen people or so that do can do that. Some might say, and I was one of those, that this budget is overcomplicated for a reason. Overcomplicated for a reason because the people that know the answers to the questions I just asked have a lot of power. So to simplify, and I'm not, very well the concerns of my good friend from Bates Creek and my good friend from the Ivory Tower might be true. I'm not saying they're not. They might be very well true. But I don't know how true. And that's why I'm for this bill, because I'd like to know. I'd like to know how much I'm spending on schools, because frankly, I don't think we spend enough. I'm in the group that doesn't think we do. I think it's unfair. I don't think we do. I don't think we spend enough categorically across the board in the basket of goods. How many people know what the basket of goods is and how much we spend on it? 16,000 something per student, whatever it is. But do we know? I don't know. Capital construction, all of it the same. So what we're just trying to do here, folks, is take these baskets and take these numbers and take in the handout all the dips and dreps and trips and tranches over here and try to put them into one and say, write a check out of one. And if we don't have enough money to fund the things we need to fund, we need to go into our savings account and pull the money over, that'd be the LISRA, and pull it over and say, that's how much we're writing to schools this year. And then when you stand up and say, we're spending too much money on schools, we're gonna know how much money you're talking about. Or if I say we're not, Mr. Chairman, if we're not spending enough on schools, I'll know what that number is. Because I'd like to know. And I'd like to know what you, Mr. Chairman, your thoughts and what that number is to you. And when we do, we're going to know something. And I think we'll be a little more effective at what we do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I've been left speechless because my Mr. Chairman,
Point
he
of
is
order.
absolutely correct. Transparency is a good thing.
Senator Kinski.
I will endeavor to convince my two colleagues that this is the right thing. I hope so. Right now, the budget that you come up with for major maintenance is not a function of how much money's in the coffee can. That coffee can's always half empty. You come up with that number by budgeting. We have a percentage of the value of the schools that we budget for major maintenance. And then we have experts who go out and examine the systems in the schools, and they come back with recommendations. This one needs a new roof. This one needs a new HVAC. You're not budgeting according to how much money's in the coffee can, are you? You know that it's by these rules of thumb that drive our budget and the studies that drive our budget. The coffee can has nothing to do with it. Same thing, if we're building too many schools, that's not the coffee can's fault. That's our fault as a legislature. And keeping the coffee can is not going to stop the overbuilding of schools or the politicization of building schools. You've seen it. We've all seen it. This school gets shoved to the front of the line. It might be way back in the pack, but somehow somebody with the influence and the right say moves it to the front. That's on us. That's not the coffee can's fault. The fact of the matter is major maintenance is empty and the school capital construction is empty, and we write a check to make up the difference. Keep the coffee cans, we still write the check. Get rid of the coffee cans, we still write the check to make up the deficit. That check is in the hundreds and hundreds of millions until we had this one-time run-up in property taxes. We'll go back to a structural deficit. keeping the coffee cans, I believe, buries the problem. It buries the problem, so nobody ever clearly sees what the problem is structurally with our K-12, because we run a little system here and we get some money there and we run it up through this pipeline and we pour it in from the back. Nobody in the public has any idea what the deficit is. In the ideal world, we have one checking account, and every time we come down here, we know clearly we are short $250 million on schools, or we are short $500 million on schools. And then the public clearly understands it, because they can't with this accounting system. They cannot understand the issue with this accounting system. So clearing the decks so that we clearly see the problem, quit burying the problem, is key to making sure that whatever the issue is in the long run that needs to be fixed, we're going to fix it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I really appreciate the chairman's comments. I think he's spot on many fronts. And I don't mean to belabor, but we don't get much of an opportunity to talk about this school facilities piece very often. I have found it interesting and rewarding to be on that select committee for you, Mr. Chairman, for quite some time. And I've also found it interesting that really the only time I get to see one of you is if there's some building project in your district. We don't attend those meetings very often, and I think that's why there's some misconceptions that have even been shared today. We just don't know what's going on there, and part of it is because we don't sit through the process that the select committee does. And pretty well done, and it's pretty well vetted, and it very, very seldom. You have to go all the way back to a time when there was a couple of big high schools being built up in the center part of the state, and suddenly we had a couple of little schools up in Fremont County pushed in front. It happens. There's been some little shenanigans along the way, and that's because the bills always come out here. So we built a couple of schools, and one of those ended up being the most expensive school we ever built. But that's beside the point. The point is, overall, this school facilities thing that we have done here in the Wyoming Senate has been one of the best things we've done. Have there been mistakes? Sure. We had a grade school in Cowley that was built, and you know what? By the time we got it built, it was too small. The kids filled it up, and we could have used a couple more rooms. And there's anecdotal stories all the way along the way. Along the way also, by the way, we have set some precedents to go out and rectify somebody being missed. You might remember, some of us in here remember when we reached out and helped Pine Bluffs, because it just kept languishing. And it was, thankfully, we got that done. We reached back, and we're taking care today of a school up in the Bighorn Basin that was built in the 1930s. So the chairman of the Education Committee said we should be just fine to teach our kids in that building. Well, maybe not that one. Maybe it's time. The challenge with this, and it's not going to go away, that the chairman of appropriations is right. We're still going to have the challenge. We're going to have it in a big pot. I like the bill fine. We're still going to have this challenge, folks, and it is this: $200 million every biennium we need to set aside somewhere for major maintenance of all those buildings that I referenced earlier. And then the second part of it is, unless we're going to hand off in 20 or 30 years to the next generation of state senators this school building program that, oh, by the way, we never got around to building a couple of schools every year, so we're handing you off about 50 schools that need to be redone. We are in a mode now of asset preservation, Mr. Chairman. That's why you don't see a very big bill that comes forward on school facilities. It's actually not very big compared to the old days when we were, and by the way, those schools that we built, don't forget, none of your constituents are paying any taxes on those buildings. And we were able to do that for 48 different districts out across the state. So just some things to think about as As we put these funds into one account, I think it's a great bill. But let's not lose sight of the fact that we still have a fleet of school facilities out there, Mr. Chairman, that we have to take care of and should take care of. That's what good conservative people do. We take care of what we have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's good that we're having this debate. And let me say that I continue to have major reservations about this bill. We need a different source of funding because there isn't one. Frankly, I think that the school capital construction, we'd be better off taking it out of the general fund directly rather than putting it over in competition. I think we'll still probably have to take some general fund money because we have to have a separate account for schools because we have some revenues that are dedicated constitutionally and I think by our act of admission to school funding, and you do have to account for them separately. They're probably not going to be adequate under many conditions. We'll have to spend general fund money there too. But I see a further problem with the system that the Supreme Court gave us, where the state is responsible for the school capital construction. Frankly, what that caused, I'm sure it wasn't what the court intended, but it's a practical consequence of what they did. They don't have the facilities for legislating well, and they were legislating. The way it's worked, in my judgment, is that we worked as a giant pork barrel system. Because everyone here felt they had to defend their own school district. I think almost without exception. We figure it's part of our job as representing a particular area to defend our school system and bring home the best we can for our community. And nobody here knew enough about anybody else's communities. They know you really don't need that extra school. Or the experts gold plated it, which they do, quite a scale. I look at what's been built in our community, it's very nice. But some of them I would describe as palaces. That if the voters in my district had to vote for it with the taxes going up, never would have been built that way. There hasn't been effective restraint on what's been done. The Supreme Court pried the lid off the pork barrel. We emptied it. You can see monuments to that all over the state. So I'm afraid that will continue and it will affect our ability to operate within the schools. And I'm not one that says that if a school is so old, you've got to replace it. Personal experience, Mr. Chairman. I took some classes. They're college classes, but I took some classes in a building that General Washington quartered his troops in during the Revolution. And I didn't notice that the quality of instruction was in the slightest bit harmed by the age of the building. And yes, they had remodeled it a time or two. Once when they got running water and could have indoor plumbing. And once when they got electricity and could have lighting and things like that. And then I think at least once since then. And you do spend some money on it. But just because the school was built a certain number of years ago doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. I think you've got to replace them every 40 years or something is not a sound policy. I think the voters would discriminate locally, but none of us know enough to do that. So frankly, for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I think we would be better off not passing this bill or modifying it such that the capital construction came out of the general fund and didn't compete with the operating funds, because I think it will be used as an excuse to eventually try to knock the operating fund below what we really need, and I'm one that thinks that right now there's excesses in the system. And convinced the Senate of that previously, and then we couldn't get any agreement on the recalibration, and the feds must mess things up with that great big stimulus money, which I'm afraid got in good part frittered away. We have some real problems with our schools. We have some real problems with the quality of what's happening there. And I'm afraid this will make it worse. So I'd like to see a way where we can maybe modify this bill, but this one scares me.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 66, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Senate File 66 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 22. Will you read that in?
Senate File 22, Wyoming Public Safety Communication System Funding, sponsored by the Transportation Committee, an act relating to public safety communications, was referred to Committee Number 2, first referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation, which respectfully returned a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Kolb, and Pappas. No, Senator Furphy. Senator Boner, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, and Nethercott. No, Senator Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Boner? Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill was a bill coming out of your Joint Travel, Highways, and Military Affairs Committee through the interim. As just a short background, as you all know, since its inception in 2005, we've struggled to find ways to pay for this important system. And as you all know, this is the emergency communication system that we use statewide. We do have roughly 500 agencies using this. Many of our state agencies, our local first responders, our school districts. There's many private sector companies and organizations that are using this. There's been, just in the last year, there was 12,000 calls made on the system. So it's being used quite frequently and has become the backbone of our emergency response system in the state. The issues surrounding it has always been how do we pay for its maintenance and operation. We initially put in money to fund the towers, and we just recently of looking, they were looking for another $85 million to complete the system. We did fund $35 million out of the ARPA fund to do that. But this bill is strictly for operation and maintenance. The intent, every time since I've been in the body, we've discussed it every year how we're going to pay this, and they've come before the Transportation Committee and the Revenue Committee. It's come before many committees that had various proposals, whether we put a fee on cell phone users, we come up with various fees and taxes on different entities to pay for this. We've never really found a good solution. And it was the intent of the committee to say enough is enough. We've been battling this for too many years. This is a function of state government. The emergency system is a function of state government. It's become too important to have this statewide public safety communication system because, frankly, public safety is one of our key responsibilities. So we said, enough is enough. Let's fund this out of the general fund, and then let's put it in the standard budget and be done with it so we don't have to visit it every year. So this appropriation is for one biennium. I think, do we have okay, there's a little snafu in the fiscal note. There shouldn't be a column FY25 in the fiscal note. We're actually looking for basically an $8.6 million general fund appropriation that will be for 2 years. So basically 4.3 million per year. And that will fund the maintenance and operations. The question from the Appropriations Committee, and they can get up and speak if they'd like, was, well, can't we take this out of ARPA money? The maintenance and the operations is not an eligible, it's not eligible to be taken out of ARPA funds. Certainly construction and any expansion of the system can, and frankly, I'm going to speak with appropriations about bringing a bill that would, since we've got that kind of money available, that if we can bring a bill to finish the $50 or $53 million that's left to build out the system. But that's another bill. This again is only maintenance and operations, and it's intended to, after this appropriation, become a standard budget item. So for that, with that, I'll sit for questions.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion that when Committee of the Whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 22, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Senate File 22 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 34. Will you read the bill in, please?
Senate File 34, Trespass by Small Unmanned Aircraft, sponsored by the Judiciary Committee, an act relating to crimes and offenses, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Landon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Green, and we're ready to go. I would move, Mr. Chairman, that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 34, trespass by small unmanned aircraft. I will walk you through the bill, Mr. Chairman, here in a moment, but I had to I would like to first share something that I received in my inbox a couple of days ago. And it drew my interest in part because it comes from the northern part of Sheridan County, way up there, a little town that's right on the border, where I have cowboyed several times in my lifetime. Beautiful part of the world, but this nice constituent of the Sheridan County folks writes in to say this: I'm writing to ask that you support more drone regulations with Senate File 34. This past year, I've had drones fly low over my property and livestock and to be under my house deck, clearly not flying high. The drone flying has scared the horses and the livestock. This past summer, I ran out on my deck at sundown to what sounded like an electrical issue just to find a drone with lights on rising from under my deck area where I stood. It had lights on it. It was about 6 feet from my face and from my dog. And as I stood there on the deck in the dark, me in my bathrobe, as I'd just gotten out of the shower to see that my dog was upset about. Anyway, when I nicely informed the neighbor that his drone was low over my property and in front of my deck, he responded that he has every right to fly it where he's been flying it. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, that is in part the impetus behind Senate File 34. What Senate File 34 does is create the crime of trespass by these small unmanned aircrafts. We refer often to them as drones. So we go into Title VI and into the chapter on offenses against property, and we create this section, trespass by small unmanned aircraft. This is the same language that you would find in 63303, your trespass statute. All it does is single out this small unmanned aircraft. A person is guilty of trespass if the person causes a small unmanned aircraft to enter into the immediate reaches of the airspace over a private property, and that entry substantially interferes with the landowner's or his authorized occupant's use and enjoyment of the land. I think that's important, Mr. Chairman, and we spent a lot of time on this bill in committee. In fact, we met 2 full days trying to get arms around the good work that our interim committee had done for us. I wanted to point out that the reference on line 3, page 2, goes to the FAA regulations, general definitions under Title 14 at the federal level. So much that we can talk about, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to do that. I know that the committee has the ability to answer some questions along with me. We can delve into as much detail on this as senators would like, but the bottom line is this airspace above our property, whether we're living here in the community of Cheyenne or if we're out across the rural parts of our state, that property belongs to us. And above that property line, that area above our houses and outside our bedroom windows, that belongs to us too. And this is trespass if we pass this bill. So, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions. Be glad to try to answer. Thank you.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, first let me say I think this bill is useful and very supportive of it. My concern is over the enforcement mechanism. You've got the standard low misdemeanor penalty in here. And the trouble with it is not so much the size of the penalty, but it will rarely be prosecuted. Let me make a suggestion that at least outside the urban areas, I think would be quite useful. I think maybe a little self-help is indicated here, possibly. And what I'm going to suggest is that we allow a landowner, and it couldn't apply in the city because it wouldn't be safe, but a landowner to take a drone that is trespassing and You know, the parallel is very clear. That's what we do, say you take beavers. They're very useful animals. But if they do harm to you by building a dam in the head gate, you can take them. Same thing with these drones. If you allow the landowner to take the drone, and I thought maybe a shotgun would be appropriate legal weapon to take a drone with, maybe it doesn't have enough range, be open to consultation on that. But in all seriousness, Mr. Chairman, I asked the proponents of this bill, why don't we put a provision in here that allows the landowner to take them and specifies maybe some of the means that can be used, make a shotgun a legal weapon to take a drone with. And I think you would see much better compliance with this law and much better enforcement when there was a violation, at least in the rural areas. I don't see how you could use that method safely within a city, but in a rural area, you sure could.
Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would probably stand to support kamikaze drones, but on a more point to the bill is page 1, line 14. Could someone explain the definition of immediate reaches? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The practicality of the bill, I'm with the good chairman from Natrona County in that, so what? They're taking pictures, they're on our property. What can we do? I mean, they can fly away, and where do you go with that? I believe, like you said, putting in something that the owner can net it, shoot it down, whatever, have that right to do that. So my question is, can that be put in the bill? Some way to capture the ad.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question involves with page 1, line 15, beginning line 15. It says it's got to fly over the airspace, and the entry substantially interferes with the landowner's or his authorized occupant's use and enjoyment of the land. So who is going to be the arbiter of that? How is that going to be determined? Seems pretty subjective to me. And I mean, are we letting the courts do that, or how does that work? I just need some assurance that I understand how that's going to happen.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, the committee promised me that they'd be right behind me if a fight broke out. My gosh, we're going to charge the hill anyway. So, Mr. Chairman, to answer my good friend from Sweetwater County, immediate reaches, we spent quite a bit of time on this. The FAA, we kept calling it the FFA, but it's the FAA, has ceded authority under 500 feet, basically. It's still a work in progress. This is a whole brand new part of our society, as we all know, and that's why we're looking at a brand new section of law. But so we had an operator testify this morning that 400 feet is the top of where he's allowed to go. He's one of those certified, licensed drone operators, and there's a difference. There's literally 3 different categories at the federal level of how you can be licensed to fly these things. Those guys are official. I think much of the nefarious activity is taking place, Mr. Chairman, by those who just go to the box store and get them one of these, and away they go with them. There are pretty strict requirements under the federal guidelines that are referenced in the bill. Regarding to my friend from Laramie County who sits behind me, that's exactly right. This is a section of law that, not unlike trespass, that will primarily be determined in the courts on a case-by-case basis. And back to my friend from around the mountain up in Natrona County, absolutely, there's all kinds of things that come under consideration. And I, for one, believe that we will be working in this section of law for a long time. It's a brand-new section for a reason. I really commend our interim committee. I think this bill, the reason I think it lands in a good spot is that one side really doesn't like it very much, would like it to be a lot more specific. The other side wants a whole bunch of exemptions. We want to start listing exemptions. I think they'd be as long as my short leg. So there's a lot of room going forward. I personally, and I think the committee joins me in this feeling that this bill comes in a pretty good spot. The former chairman helped to draft the bill, and as I said, the language is pulled over from our trespass. The bottom line, the senator from the Bighorn Basin kept reminding us, you know what, a violation of that airspace above my house, that is trespass. No matter how you say it. You would hope that some of those who want exemptions are going to check with the landowner before they go flying over the top, whether it's to go fix a down power line or check on a ruptured pipe. But frankly, there are rights of way too, and you can fly these down the rights of way. So I think it's pretty much going to be decided in our courts, and that's what we have a judiciary branch for. But I think it's important that we get this in the green books, that we consider this trespass. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I have a problem with this bill because it talks about various things, but it doesn't get at the heart of what we're trying to protect from. And looking at how another state handled it would be a much better solution. So I'm just going to read some text to you. Drones may not be used for surveillance in violation of another party's reasonable expectation of privacy. This includes law enforcement. However, police may use drones with a valid search warrant. Now, that language, I believe, Mr. Chairman, solves the problem. I think that if we just allow this kind of language to get through this chamber, we're just creating a court problem with a bunch of words, immediate reaches. We don't know how many feet that is. I mean, we could even take this language that I read to you, and we could put some kind of height restriction in there, because that is normal to have restrictions under federal aircraft rules. As a matter of fact, we're talking about the airspace above our property. Well, planes can fly above that legally, and you can't stop them. They can't come down past the minimum height. Obviously, but I mean, understand that the way the federal law works is 400 feet from the highest structure, and that's that area that's open. We could probably come to some kind of understanding that there are certain camera capabilities with these drones. The case that was mentioned in Sheridan, there are some restrictions. You cannot fly. Now, it depends on the weight of the drone, so I don't know those particulars. But if a drone is a certain size, in other words, not a mini drone, they can't just fly upon people. There are restrictions, and there are means to rectify that on the federal level. But what is said in the case that was mentioned is they were surveilling at a very close range. And that is something that they were violating the privacy of the individual. So I think if that is the purpose of the bill, I think we need to be very specific and use specific language about illegal surveillance. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a really good discussion and really highlights the challenges associated with both the law of trespass and new technology associated with drones. So some challenges associated with the language that the good senator from Laramie County brought out, which is surveillance, right? Well, what if the defense from the person in Sheridan was they were using it for fun, just to fly around? It has no camera equipment. It's just this machine operating and buzzing around your house. There's no surveillance. That's fine then. It's not trespass because it's not surveilling you. What does surveillance mean? I guess that's a question for the courts to decide, huh? We never want that to happen. In a reasonable expectation of privacy. I want all of you to consider very carefully whether or not you have a reasonable expectation of privacy when you are outside of your home, in your front yard. Really? You have an expectation of privacy in your front yard? Anybody can walk by and see you. I think not. Now your backyard. Do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in your backyard? That's going to depend on the size of your fence and your trees and the time of year. Whether or not you have neighbors, whether or not you live on 40 acres, whether or not you live in dense urban Cheyenne. Reasonable expectation of privacy is also a moving target. I could run a truck through any of these terms as a lawyer, and lawyers will. Fortunately, immediate airspace is certainly going to be a reasonable expectation for a jury to determine. If you're able to see it and shoot it, I'm guessing it's immediate airspace. If it's below that 500 feet, which is within our jurisdiction to regulate for airspace, because the FAA has ceded that authority to the states, likely going to be immediate airspace. Whether or not it impedes with your, substantially interferes with your use and enjoyment of property, that is a legal term of art, actually, that is common in the legal, in case law for substantially interferes with the use and enjoyment of your property. Because imagine someone flying a drone over your property and you have 100 acres and they're just buzzing through and you want to take them down for trespass. You maybe want to shoot it down. Really, they're just flying through and it may not be substantially interfering with your property. And are we really going to charge these folks or track them down when they're flying across, when you own hundreds of acres, right, over a large ranch? The answer is maybe. It depends on the facts and circumstances, and that's where discretion comes in. Are they substantially interfering with the use of enjoyment of your property, such as scaring the livestock, right? Or potentially interfering with your right of privacy if you're doing something out there on your 100 acres that you don't want the public to see. That might be important and that might interfere with substantial use and enjoyment of your property. So yes, will this law be challenged in court by defense attorneys? It certainly is, just like the Fourth Amendment is every day, and these issues will be worked out in the courts. However, I do think that this bill draft in front of you has been crafted carefully and thoughtfully, recognizing those balancing of interests that have to be done with great discretion. I would urge caution when authorizing the use of discharging a firearm in the law, but certainly use that to your discretion, and we can give some advice offline about that from the good senator from Bates Creek. So with that, I think the bill draft is in good shape.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I think it's a good start. I don't know if it's in good shape. And let me illustrate why I say this. If we go back to our criminal trespass laws, familiar with some of these, not personally, just through my work on Judiciary Committee, but we have set up a situation that you're going to have inadvertent trespass. And I'm cognizant of the fact that there is a lot of young people flying drones out there. And the way this is constructed right now, the way I see it, if you get some 14-year-old kid out there and he's flying the drone out there in the country like they often do, he's going to get cited. Under our normal criminal trespass, if somebody's trespassing on your private property, you have a duty to notify them to leave. So there's a first provision there that basically assumes that maybe you may be inadvertently trespassed and you ask to leave. And as long as you leave that property, you're not in violation of the criminal trespass and you don't get cited. This is one of those things that I don't know that I think this is a great start. But what I don't want to start doing is criminalizing every kid out there flying a drone over somebody's property inadvertently and not even aware of the law, or even some adult that's out there that inadvertently. I've never flown these, but I've watched them fly them, and when you first start people, sometimes they don't go where you want them to do. And so there's a little bit of difficulty, there's a learning period, but the way I read the bill, if it's structured and somebody goes over there and they happen to go by wherever on your property inadvertently, not intentionally, they're guilty. And so maybe we can work on a second reading amendment. I'm willing to say, let's take a look at that, but I think you have to bring in the practicality of who's using them, what they're using them for. A lot of them, they're just recreational purposes, have no intent to trespass. It just happens inadvertently. And so maybe we can work on that as a second reading amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's interesting conversation about the substantially interfering on page 1 with the landowner's authorized use and enjoyment of the land. We had quite a bit of conversation and quite a bit of testimony. And it was interesting, I used almost that same example of a couple of high school kids, you know, flying drones over there and maybe doing something for a class project or whatever. There were a few folks that testified that we should take out substantially, but I think leaving it in is what really keeps the meat of the bill pertinent, because I think, you know, if a kid inadvertently does it, if they're there every day and they're messing with your cattle and they're, you know, trying to check out the lady next door, you know, who might be wandering out with her robe on or whatever, that's a whole different deal. So that's why we left substantially in there, even though we had some testimony to the effect that maybe we should take it out. I don't know if that clarifies that, but I think that it does. Thank you.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As has been said here, we spent a lot of time in interim researching this, finding the right language. It's not perfect language, but it's language that comes from, a lot of it from this little thing called, let me read it here, Second Restatement of Torts, Section 159. And what that says is, a trespass may be committed beneath, on the surface, or above the surface of the earth. It also says flight by an aircraft in the airspace above the land of another is trespass if and only if it enters the immediate reaches of the airspace above that land and it interferes substantially with the other's use of and enjoyment of his land. So the law is out there, and this is simply a codification of it. The language here, in my opinion, covers the inadvertent trespass. And then the laws go back further to this little group called the U.S. Supreme Court, clear back to 1946, as they defined immediate airspace. And they said anything above 500 feet is a public highway. Now they say 400 feet is a ceiling for these commercial craft, that's fine. But basically everything from the surface of the ground to 400 feet, if you will, according to the Supreme Court, shall be decided in a case-by-case basis by a jury. So that's the reason the language is there, because the language is there adheres to the Supreme Court rulings, it adheres to the FFA rulings, and it adheres to case law. So this was thought through very well. It was very well written. Right now, it needs to move forward. If somebody wants to bring an amendment, there was a lot of discussion on business. Should there be carve-outs? Which business and who gets special treatment? I think right now we need to move forward with this bill as it's written. It's written this way for a reason, and that reason is this is law. We're trying to codify.
Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the explanations that have been provided, particularly with immediate reaches. It sounds like that is a term of art from the codification of torts. The question I have, though, is would we benefit from trying to define that more specifically? I mean, it sounds like case law suggests a potential scope, but that the fact that case law suggests that scope doesn't mean we have to use that scope. If we were to say it's 100 feet, for example, then it would be 100 feet. I'm not saying 100 feet's the right answer. I'm just kind of contemplating whether it would be beneficial to try to clarify what we mean by immediate reaches. I can tell you when I read it, I had no idea. I appreciate and benefit from this discussion and debate, but it wouldn't hurt my practical sense if there was just 100 feet and recognizing that it would be hard to know exactly whether it was in 100 feet. So something along those lines. I'm curious if that was discussed of trying to further clarify that. The aspect of this that still causes me more pause is the idea, and I again understand where it comes from, but I still think it's worth discussing, about the substantial interference with an occupant's use and enjoyment of the land. And the concern I have there is, the mental exercise I was going through is, so if somebody hides on your property, your regular property, and they just sort of sneak on your property, and they regular trespassing, but you don't know they're there, then they're not trespassing by this standard. I mean, it's kind of the analogy, right? If you don't see them, they're not trespassing because they haven't interfered with your enjoyment. They haven't done anything. You haven't even really realized they're there. So when you take that to the ground, it seems a little bit absurd, but we're kind of saying that where if I've got a very quiet drone, and let's say that I've got it sky colored on the bottom and it's sort of floating along, and I just can't even spot that, Mr. Chairman, then that's not trespassing. And I guess that's a little disconcerting that that would be the case, that it's okay as long as you're sneaky enough not to get caught, which is not a traditional standard for trespassing. And so I have a little bit of concern with that. What I will say, Mr. Chairman, is this is a step in the right direction. And I think the criticism in the debate and discussion is based on trying to strengthen it to the point where it serves the interests of property owners and privacy rights and all of that. And I think surveillance is a key point, but that's another layer that probably needs to be discussed and added. So this is a great start, Mr. Chairman. I just think that it would benefit from further discussion, and maybe we can strengthen it. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I believe earlier today, and we took a third reading on a trespass bill. So I'm curious under this bill, and maybe somebody explained to me. So I start my drone and I'm on federal land and I cross over somebody's private property, but I inadvertently, what's the word? Substantially interfered. They're moving their cattle out there and it scattered the cattle. But that wasn't my final destination with the drone. I was going over here and I was going to fly it over here on Devil's Tower. That's all public property. Would that be a trespass? Would that be a violation of my First Amendment right to deny me the ability to cross somebody's private property, even if I inadvertently substantially interfered with their enjoyment, to go photograph Devil's Tower? Is that now a trespass? I don't know. We got a 10th Circuit Court of Appeals that said, yeah, that's probably a trespass and a violation of my, or not a trespass, that's a violation of my First Amendment rights. I'm just curious as how that scenario would fit into what we had the rulings from the courts under that scenario. And again, Mr. Chairman, my intent here is not trying to kill this. I think we need this. I just want to make sure that we've contemplated every potential alternative. What we do is we write laws, and oftentimes we pass laws and they have unintended consequences. That's why we have debate. This is why we get more people to look at these, is to ask these questions, so the laws we do pass hopefully we're not back here next year because we didn't contemplate the unintended consequences of what we did this year. So that's just a question, but again, I think it points to the fact this is a really good start, but we need to have this debate. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cole.
Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure I emphasize that from my earlier comment that I heard. A few things. So the committee that worked on this was the committee that I was on during the interim. There indeed was a whole lot of discussion, and it was clearly evident that something had to be put forth. So just a few things for people's, I guess, reference. These are used, say, in a more wide open setting for potentially casing a property for burglary, which is, you know, I mean, for that purpose. The other thing is these drones themselves, the new software actually tracks the path, and they're identified, these drones. I mean, if you're doing it legally, they're identified and it tracks the path. So I believe law enforcement could go back and look at said path to figure out just what you were up to when you were flying your said drone around. More importantly, you know, I represent a city, and I can, for the life of me, I equate this to my backyard. I have a gate that's closed, and someone takes their said drone, for what reason, I'm not sure, flies it over my backyard where I have a locked gate and a reasonable expectation of privacy, and photographs my wife, who might be sunbathing out there. I don't much care if they slipped over by mistake, but when they hover, I think that goes beyond the pale. And that is an issue. You know, with great choice comes great responsibility. You're going to fly one of these things, like operating a motor vehicle, you have a responsibility. I do think we have to build in safeguards, and I look forward to hearing what someone might come up with for some sideboards, if that's necessary. But this bill is definitely necessary. In the year 2023, I can assure everyone, these are being used extensively, and not all for the right reason. And we don't write laws for the people that follow the law. We write laws for the people that can't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll try to bring this home, and really do appreciate the debate, a good conversation. Some great points brought up by the senator from Laramie County to the senator from Albany County. We certainly did talk about 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet. Well, should we just keep it at 400? We can have that conversation as this bill progresses. We finally landed on the spot that, you know what, I think it's good where we're at. This is to go back to the majority floor leader and the analogy that we cut across the corner up there by Devil's Tower. All I would say is, if you come down and get on the ground and do it, and you booger the cattle by cutting through the corner, you've trespassed, haven't you? So, Mr. Chairman, that is trespass, and it would be trespass over the air. Now, I think we always have to remember that here in Wyoming, we still have, I think, quite a bit of common sense and quite a bit of neighborly behavior, and we can count on people to understand that, hey, to the deputy sheriff, I called you out here, and I found out that it's the rural electric guys, and they're just checking the lines. You know, that person's not going to get charged. We're going to have to count on some common sense here, but I think this bill needs to move forward. It's a good, sturdy little Christmas tree, and if we decide we want to hang a bulb on it, we can visit tomorrow about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm going to give you a real life story. I had a house that I was listing, and I had a guy come out to fly a drone who had a license to do so. That's the only way you can actually do that with a commercial. If they're getting paid, they have to have a federal license. So in order to get the best shot of the property, he had to fly over the neighbor's property. So right when we were about ready to wrap it up, the sheriff's department showed up. And he said the neighbor had called because the drone was over his property. And I can assure you it was pretty good height because we were taking an overall shot of an acreage, large acreage. And we told the deputy what we were doing and why he was over at the angle he was, trying to get a picture of there's a hill, and as the property goes down, it was just a perfect picture to have the drone where it was. And the deputy said, I get it. You guys aren't breaking any law. I will go talk to the neighbor. So I can probably say that if you had this in place the way it is, that he probably wouldn't want the drone where it was, and we'd probably be in court. And I just want to point out to you that there are other factors that have nothing to do with trying to take away someone's enjoyment of their property that are going to come into play here. And I want to say he was probably at around 300 feet when he took the shot, and you cannot hear that drone. They saw more so the drone flying over the property that we were actually listing, but when they were taking the shot on the other property, they were already way up into the air. So, and I can assure you, you can't hear that drone when it was up there. And in fact, they have things that they can put quieter blades on them. They can do all kinds of things where you can't even hear them. Again, I'm not trying to say that there isn't a necessity for such protections, especially for surveillance. What I'm trying to say is we're going to end up tying up the courts and putting people who are doing legitimate work or who are even trying to do and keep a better standard by having the commercial license, by following all the other laws that are in place, and by trying to be courteous to people around them. But they are going to get caught up in a snare. So I think there are just different layers we need to make sure we put in here. For instance, and look, if you have somebody that has a commercial license, you have ability to hold them to an even higher standard. And this would be the bill to do it in. So I just don't think this is ready for prime time the way it is. I think we can improve it, but we need to look at all the different things that could happen right off the bat, because it's going to happen right away. And we will tie up the court with things that probably didn't need to go there. And I think that there's a number of laws in different states that we can look at and even combine them to make sure we add protections to the citizens and protections to people who are doing legitimate commercial work by flying a drone. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott.
Thanks to the good senator of Laramie County, and at risk of droning on. I know. It was his joke. I just want, there's this fear that we're going to influx the courts and have all these children convicted of crimes. Criminal trespass right now just requires you to be somewhere you're not supposed to be and after being warned. And so think of that scenario where all the kids running off to school in the morning and going there, and they cut through the neighbor's yard. And you know that old guy, Uncle Tom, who's manicures his yard really well, and he yells at those kids, "Stay off my yard." And they're like, yeah, whatever. And then they go do it the next day, and they're running through there every day. And you know what? They're not in jail. And Uncle Tom's just mad about his yard and his manicured grass, right? Why? Because we have that common sense that the chairman of judiciary identified, right? That even if Uncle Tom's really mad because he just mowed that, fertilized it, all that good stuff, and those kids who are now 14 are still running through there, you know what? They're still not going to jail, nor are they going to court. Because good sense prevails, and all of the people in that process with their discretion recognize that even though technically they could be charged with criminal trespass, they just aren't. And so let's give credit to all of the common sense applications of our laws associated with this type of crime and be kind of realistic about when this would be enforced and when it's not. But let's keep up the good discussion, 'cause certainly amendments are welcome. Thank you.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 34, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Senate File 34 has passed committee of the whole. The next bill for your consideration
I'm going to, Mr. Chairman, I request the committee of the whole stand at ease to the sound of the gavel. I want to give staff about a 10-minute break if they need to get up and walk around, or you need to get up and walk around. So let's be back in here by 4 o'clock, Mr. Chairman. One other observation today, and it's just as we need to continue to police ourselves. I think it's always important that we address the chair and some of the debates today. We've got a little lackadaisical about not addressing the chair, and it's been good. It is on our rules to say to go through the chair, address the chair. That doesn't mean you can't turn and look around at the body, but don't just stand here and stare at us. And just as an observation, let's abide by the rules. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I would say request. Let me see. We stand at ease to the sound of the gavel, and at 4 o'clock we be back in here. Thank you. You've heard the motion.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Committee of the Whole, please come to order. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 103. The reading clerk will read in the Senate file.
Senate File 103, Sales Tax Exemption State Legislators, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz, an act relating to sales tax. It was referred to Committee Number 3, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Beitman, French, Ide, and DePappas. No, Senator McEwen. Senator Beitman, Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Vice
I
President.
believe on the okay, well, that is the next thing on the general file. Something happened. Got reshuffled. Never mind.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Beitman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report it do so with a due pass recommendation of Senate File 103. There is a standing committee amendment. I'll ask the reading clerk to please read that in, please.
Senate File 103, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 10, after.
Thank you very much. With the explanation of the bill and to dispose of the standing committee amendment, I'll call on the great Senator Steinmetz.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking a look at this good little bill. Fellow legislators, the genesis of this bill was when we served on the Legislative Compensation and Salary Committee over the interim, and we were looking at different ways to deal with some of the issues facing us as state legislators, including our per diem and our wages and other issues. And so this is just an idea I'm throwing out there for us to consider of possibly exempting ourselves from sales tax. And so you would ask yourself, well, we get a daily per diem, so how would we save money, or how would we save money on this? One, it would be, for me, I could vote for this rather than an increase on the per diem rate. And then secondly, the way we would save money is a lot of us are turning in our actual expenses because they're going far over the $109 a day. And so it was hopeful that this would save us a little bit. The other reason for the bill is because it seems like we're taking money out of one pocket and putting it in another. So rather than, leaving it in the general fund, we're sending it out to some local entities and to the tourism account. With that being said, the bill simply takes and makes an exemption for lodging tax for members of the state legislature while acting in their official capacity. That's found on page 2, and that's what the amendment does, is it adds on line 10 after services while acting in the member's official capacity, because that was the intent of the bill. So if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 103, get that out of the way, and then continue discussing the bill.
Can you read it in? It has been. I believe that's already been read in.
That's correct. So I just moved it.
Just all in favor, say aye.
Question on the amendment.
Discussion on the amendment. Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Beitman's motion to adopt the Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 103, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. This is a standing committee amendment, not a Committee of the Whole amendment. So we're going to need, and it was Senator Steinmetz's motion to adopt the standing committee amendment. It wasn't my motion.
We'll try it again. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion to adopt the Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 103, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 103 has passed. We are back on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the bill. So basically, the exemptions for other government entities are found in 3915-105. Some of the people that are exempt are, there's an exemption for sales to the state of Wyoming and its political subdivisions, sales made to religious and charitable organizations, occasional sales made by religious and charitable organizations, joint powers boards organized under the Wyoming Joint Powers Act, sales price for the use of admission fees for county or municipal-owned recreation facilities such as swimming pools, athletic facilities, recreation centers, labor or service charges, including transportation and travel for repair or alteration of improvement for real property for the state of Wyoming, sales to irrigation districts, sales to weed and pest control districts, interstate transit of persons by government or charitable nonprofit organizations. So there's a whole list of entities that are funded by taxpayer dollars that are exempted from some form of sales tax or lodging tax all across the state. So we're simply saying that state legislators and acting in their official capacity would be as well. When we contemplate that, I think one of the main issues with all of it is just how we are paid. We're reimbursed rather than the Legislative Service Office paying for our hotel room, Mr. Chairman, and that's why it's not a tax exempt sale right now. With that being said, how would the logistics work? Say a state legislator is going to, for example, the far western side of the state where my good tall friend is from over here, and that have some of the highest hotel rooms in the state, and we have had committee meetings there. You would simply get your streamlined sales tax certificate of exemption. You have that in your drawer. You would fill that out and you would give that to the hotel person, and they would have that on file for the Department of Revenue when they turn in their taxable sales at the end of the month. And so logistically, that's how that would work. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that is the explanation of the bill, and I would stand for any questions. Thank you.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was in Revenue Committee when the good senator presented this, and I had some issues with it. I still do, but I did vote for it to come out on the floor so we could discuss it. And the issues I have, number one, if you look at the fiscal note, I think it says it saves the state money. It only would save the state money, the way I see it, is if the state actually paid for our rooms and not reimburse us. Because if we go claim an exemption and then we get reimbursed from the state, we're still getting the whole $109. We're just paying less for the room by whatever percentage the tax is, right? We keep it. So yes, we gain a little bit. So I don't see that the state's getting anything out of it unless the state pays for our room directly. And there was testimony that some organizations in the state, some agencies do that apparently. When their employees go out it gets billed back to the agency. And we could do that, I suppose. I don't know how we would do that if it wasn't the exact $109, because if the state would then reimburse that hotel, say you got the room for $72, if you could find one, how would then we would get the balance of the $109? I think the logistics are really messed up there. Also, this carve out is just for legislators, and certainly it was brought up in committee that we do fund per diem for non-legislative members of a lot of our task forces and other subcommittees that we have out there. We have public members that join, and we do pay them a per diem. But there's no carve out for them. So I see a discrepancy there. And same way with other state agencies. If the state agency reimburses the employee for a hotel room instead of paying the hotel directly from agency funds. So I really see a problem with all of this. And as I mentioned in the committee, my preference, and I think we have a bill from the other house coming, my preference would just simply, if we want to put a little more money in our pockets, let's just bite the bullet and raise our per diem rates, okay? I know that's not really very popular with some of the folks on the floor, but the rates haven't been raised for a long time, and I, for one, have always advocated that we tie it to the federal per diem rate, and then we don't visit this ever. It's our mileage rate for our mileage is tied to the federal mileage rate. I don't know why our per diem rate is not. And so, and I believe other agencies in the state are tied to that rate, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I am mistaken, somebody could correct me. But I think that's the better way, instead of carving out an exception for the legislature. I think that just, number one, won't play well. And number two, the mechanics in my mind, and I have a simple mind, Mr. Chairman, just seem overwhelmingly difficult to try to manage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, when I used to stay at a motel, after 30 days, they would reimburse me the sales tax and then not charge me any more sales tax for the rest of my stay. And that was state law that we had to show them that they didn't believe us to begin with. And it was one of the previous speakers of the House that was proud to talk about that. I do like this approach better because in the interim, when you're just going to stay for 1 or 2 nights, you don't get any sales tax. But I think that other law is still on the books. We might want to address that.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, on and against the bill. Mr. Chairman, frankly, this bill bothered me. It took me a little while to figure out why. I think we're going down a unfortunate path when we start exempting state legislators from particular taxes. And it took me a little while to figure some of that out. But essentially what we're doing is we're saying that we're deserving of a tax increase serving down here that other people who travel for business don't get. Now, if you're in business and you have to travel and stay overnight, you pay this lodging tax, whether you like it or not. I don't see why we're that different from somebody in that circumstance. And I think it's a mistake to start giving tax exemptions to legislators. So, Mr. Chairman, for that reason, I'm going to vote against this bill.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the intent of the legislation because it does make sense that if the state of Wyoming is paying for the lodging and then basically taxes itself, and as the good senator that's sponsoring it suggested, it's taking money out of one pocket and putting it into the other and circulating it back through the system. The question I have, though, is when you read that section of statute, it's pretty clear the intent is don't tax the state of Wyoming, and that we have a little bit of a glitch, I guess we'll call it, that we are taxing us in our capacity as the state of Wyoming, Wyoming government, just because of the mechanism in which we're paying. Was there discussion or contemplation as this was being drafted of broadening it to the point where it was more generalized to basically anyone on behalf of the state of Wyoming or its municipalities or governments that's acting in an official capacity would be exempt from sales and use taxation for their lodging? In other words, I think one of the concerns that is being expressed, Mr. Chairman, is the idea that we're seeing a lot of specificity to the legislature and that just effectively doesn't play well. But I don't think that's the intent. I think the intent is simply to carry out that this should apply to all government employees working in an official capacity who happen to be on per diem and not have a functional way of reflecting that sales tax exemption. So is there a way that we could maybe thread the needle here a little bit?
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the bill, I think what the good senator was trying to do, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, try to prevent us from having to get pay raises and just suggest a way that we can kind of lower expenses for the state, not necessarily carve us out, but just a suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, the tall senator from Bates Creek brings up a good point. I believe this is just a sales tax exemption, which is 4 to 5% in various counties in Wyoming. There's also a lodging tax, and this does not exempt from the lodging tax. And in some cases, the lodging tax is more than the sales tax. So this is just a sales tax exemption is the way I read it. Thank you.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you guys all for the good debate. To the last speaker, the movie star, or news star, should I say, from Wyoming. Actually, this is on the lodging tax only. If you read in the line 1 and 2, it is under the sales tax area in statute, but it is for the lodging tax because that is the bulk of what we pay as we go across the state. And so, and I've kind of forgotten some of the other questions, but as far as broadening it to other folks, yes, we had that debate in committee and we talked about someone else maybe bringing a bill to do that so that we could cover people that are on boards and commissions that might be being reimbursed. I know, for example, on the Water Development Commission, and if I'm wrong, someone out there in the Zoom land can let me know, that the Water Development Commission, the Water Development Office actually pays for their rooms, and so they're tax exempt, whereas we are reimbursed, so we're not. The reimbursement part of that is the only reason, because as you all know, our withholding, everything that how we're paid and how we're treated as an employee of the state is pretty much similar to a state employee. And so that, with that being said, I don't know if someone else is working on a bill to expand that. I think it's certainly in order to do that. And with that, I think I've answered the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The concerns I have with this bill in its present form are You know, our Constitution says, Article 3, Section 46, interested members shall not vote. A member who has a personal or private interest in any measure or bill proposed or pending before the legislature shall disclose that fact and shall not vote. Years ago, when we've been having the per diem discussion for years. I'm a frugal lady. I've tried to live within those means. And what happens is, you know, if I get a hotel room for $100, the tax is $5. I get to keep the difference between that amount and 109. So there I get to keep $4. With this in place, I get to keep $9. And that may seem insignificant, but that is a benefit. So as it's written right now, for us to do as we've always done, collect per diem, that's my biggest concern with this bill. As previously mentioned, I think maybe this does make sense if we make it on a reimbursable basis. So instead of worrying about living within that per diem, members just turn in all their receipts for all their meals, all their hotel expenses. But I think we need to be mindful that that will come with an administrative impact as well. Managing all that paper, I'm guessing the reason we have per diem was for to reduce that administrative burden. So just a caution on how, if we were to move it in that direction, that there would be an impact there. So I don't know that we've threaded the needle. I, like many other speakers, have big concerns with it just being limited to members of the legislature. We have staff we know that travel with us. It makes sense if we're going to do this to do it more thoroughly. And I'd rather see that come together in one bill rather than try and do it piecemeal, because if we do it piecemeal, there's no guarantee that one of the bills will move and the other won't. So, you know, my concern is a sincere one when it comes to the constitutionality of it, along with some of the other language in our Constitution about creating special laws. One of them is increasing or decreasing fees, percentages, or allowances of public officers. I, for one, don't feel comfortable voting on this in its present form simply because I know I would benefit from it financially. So hopefully, you know, the bringers of the bill will come up with some ideas of how to remedy that within the bill title, and hopefully we'll see some improvements. But right now, that's my concern, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kolb.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start off by saying serving in the legislative body has been an honor, but I can tell you it wasn't with the knowledge I knew I was going to lose money. I do it because I'm passionate about it. So if we're going to talk about it's going to increase something, I'd challenge that with saying I can do the math and show it's a decrease. It's money. You're losing financial money. Ask my wife. But it's something I'm passionate about. And I do love the lodging tax because it's advertised as somebody else pays for it. And you know, I'll just tell you, who I see pay for it is you and me and people going to a soccer game and whatever else they're doing. That's who's paying for this, combined with some out-of-state folks. But no, I don't think this is an increase in any way on a deficit. I think it's something. It's probably the minimal as far as I'll probably go, but I think it's something. I find it ironic that the counties, because of course they have a different way of handling per diem issues, well, they pay it themselves and get around this. So because we choose to not have extra staff and we choose to do it in a more efficient way, you know, I guess we bear that cost. And I suppose that's the question at hand. So I definitely don't think there's any pay increase on a loss, near as I can calculate on my books. But I think it's something that's, you know, relatively harmless. I think maybe we could expand it if that's the case. But I think for a conversation, it's worth having and worth moving this bill out of committee of the whole, moving it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way I see it, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense that the state would charge itself lodging tax. No more it makes sense for the state to charge itself property tax. So if you think about it through that, or see it through that lens, that's what the good bringer of the bill is trying to do. Like we said, we're just taking money out of one pocket and put it in the other. This avoids that. We're not charging ourselves, because the difference between the good tall senator's example was a business trip. This isn't a business trip. When we're on official duty, we're employees of the state. This is taxpayer money. So we're charging the taxpayers lodging tax for the legislature to stay at a hotel. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense to the good taxpayers back home. So that's why I support the bill.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've heard this a couple of times now, and in my mind, it's completely wrong what I've heard said, that we're taking it out of one pocket and paying the other. It's not the case unless the state pays directly for our rooms. That's not happening. We're being reimbursed. If we told the hotel to bill the state and the state paid them directly, yes, the state will keep that 5% or whatever the lodging tax is, right? They'll keep that $5 out of the $100. But that's not the case. We pay for the hotel room. They give us a deduction at that point. Instead of $100, we pay $95. That $95 stays in our pocket. So don't tell me it's going back to the state. It's not going back to the state. It goes in our pocket. So you're making $5 on a hotel night, right? It's not going back to the state unless the state pays directly. If the state pays directly, they'll pay the $95 and they'll keep the $5. But we're still getting $109 per diem. We're going to get that. We just keep the $5 in our pocket, okay? And if I'm wrong, please tell me, but I believe a good senator from Laramie County over here mentioned it. Instead of $105, she gets $109. She keeps the extra $4 or $5. Thank you.
Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I sat in on this committee as well. I struggled with a lot of the comments that were made today. The optics of it looks like, special carve-outs because we're special, but the fiscal note pretty much tells it all. We're saving the taxpayers money. I was against the lodging tax when it came out, voted against it. And I think we're saving the taxpayers money here, and bottom line, that's what we're here to protect our constituents. Thank you.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, on and against this bill, the lodging tax does not go back to the state. The lodging tax is used locally for projects. The sales tax goes back to the state, and if they say that they're just exempting lodging tax, then I'm against this. That is not a state function. It's a local function. Has to be voted on locally to reimburse or use it for promotion of businesses in the local community. So I don't want an exemption from the lodging tax. Thank you.
Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against. Heard a lot of talk. It's a great debate, but I've heard a lot of talk about the taxpayers. Well, let's talk about those folks for a minute. In the last election, every community in this state that had a lodging tax on its ballot was approved. Increases, approved. Taxpayers spoke on this. They liked the lodging tax for the reasons that my good friend, this radio star and television mogul, actually just mentioned. More importantly, this is a bill that passed this body just a few years ago. We're now just starting to see the effects of that tax and how it's worked. It's worked phenomenally well. Our tourism department is now off the general budget, which saved us, when it went off, $25 million. Now it is raising more than that, and in local communities across this state, they are using it to invest in our now second largest industry, tourism. And my final point on this is I get the opportunity, by being lucky enough, or enough people died, left town, and forgotten my county, to elect me to be back in this job. So I get to travel a lot around the state. I love it. I love going to communities like my friend here in Goshen County and going to see the fort, going to see some of the great sites around, seeing beautiful land that's totally different from where I live, but still a great community. And boy, I tell you what, I still get letters, because I stopped in, from their Chamber of Commerce about what they're doing. I get a monthly newsletter from the Goshen County Chamber. I get them from a lot of others too, and the great things they're doing with this tax, and one of the great things that they're doing. It's a heck of an investment. It's working very well. And frankly, I don't think that we should exempt ourselves from it, and I don't think we should travel down the slippery slope of freeing anyone else from this. It's a good investment. It's paying off. And you know who says so? Your taxpayers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Senator French.
You know, this bill is I view it as a start. I struggled with it too, you know, but in my mind, this lodging tax should not apply to any Wyoming citizen. Because if you go from where I live, up at Powell, down to, let's say, Rock Springs, you travel clear across the state to watch your kids or grandkids play a basketball game. When you get to that town, any town, you're driving on streets that the taxpayers paid for. You're going to that school that the taxpayers paid for that school. Somebody has injury, that ambulance that comes to you, you paid for it. They have to go to the hospital. The local voters paid for that hospital. I don't think any Wyoming person should pay that lodging tax. That lodging tax, when everybody votes for it, was for, let's tax the tourists, the millions of them that are coming to Grand Teton, Yellowstone, Devil's Tower, wherever in Wyoming. Everybody said, well, let's put a tax on them. I don't think they ever said, well, let's tax ourselves when we go see our grandkids play a game. It was designed to tax those tourists, not the Wyoming citizens. So.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess we have a baseball game going. Let me address the reason I signed on to this bill. And there was only one reason: to save money. To save money. You know, we talk about, you know, a carve out for state legislators. I think it wouldn't be a big secret how I would vote on a salary increase or a per diem increase. I think everyone here probably would guess how I would vote on that. The issue of this bill is to save the state money. That's what this is about. I'd like to see state employees on this. If it could save us more money for the state, I'd be open to that. This has nothing to do about putting $5 more in our pocket. I signed on to this bill to save the state money. No one's forcing me to run for public office. You know, no one's here for the money, that's for sure. I think all of us, or most of us, would agree it costs us money to be in the state legislature. This is a way to save the state money. That's the primary purpose of this bill.
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I have to absolutely disagree with that comment. The state will not save any money, let me reiterate, unless the state pays the bill. That's not happening. The state is paying us. That extra money, if you look in the fiscal note, and number one, it is not just on lodging tax, it's on all tax. It's on sales tax as well. And it's a new paragraph, K. It's all the excise tax that's on lodging. But it's not saving the state money. It's going into our pockets. And certainly under this bill, we can't expand it to all, you know, the bill title won't let us expand it. We, as a good bringer of the bill mentioned, it'd have to be a separate bill. But I don't know how to I guess express myself clear enough that this is not money that's going back to the state. Okay? It's going into our pockets unless we change the system and get away from reimbursables. If we get away from reimbursables, I agree. We'll save that money. The state will save that money. But we'll have to change that system. And I don't know whether that's a policy or whether that's a statute. I don't know. It's probably a policy from the management council or something. But I know that if the state starts having to get bills from hotels and then reimbursing them, I think there's a whole lot of work that's going to be thrust upon our staff at LSO to start paying all our bills for us. But that is the only way that they're going to keep that money. The state will keep the money. The only way. The state is not getting, I don't know how many times I have to say that. The state is not getting any money back. It's going into our pockets if we pass this bill.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, my colleague just illustrated the reason we need this bill. So let's take the money out of our pockets. That's the effect of what it does, because he's correct. You get reimbursed for that sales tax. So if you pay $90 for a motel room, $5 tax, you get reimbursed for that $95. If we don't tax it to begin with, you're only going to get reimbursed for the $90, and then the state's not paying you an additional $4 under that scenario. I think that's probably actually the best explanation of why we need this, is so legislators don't continue to get reimbursed for taxpayers' dollars. So maybe that's an oversimplification, but the argument that it's going in our pockets, the best way to do that is just get rid of the tax, then we don't get paid the tax when we get reimbursed.
Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hear an argument here, and I hear an argument over here, and I keep hearing reimbursement. We're not being reimbursed. We are being given a per diem, and there's a difference. If we're turning in a receipt, then that's a reimbursement, but that's not it. If we choose to stay in a $49 room or a $200 a night room, that's still up to us. It's not a reimbursement, it's a per diem, and there's a huge difference.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think the last two comments illustrate that there are actually two systems available to the members of this legislature. We can all continue to do what most of us probably do, and that's accept a per diem, which is not a reimbursement, a per diem. Or if you do have a room that's $200, you can actually ask for reimbursement. You can actually ask for reimbursement by providing the receipts and being reimbursed for the actual cost. That is, in my mind, the only way this would work. And while we're at it, let's just add some more money to our LSO staff budget so they can hire a couple more fiscal folks to deal with this, because that would be us then billing the state for expenses that we actually incurred and asking for reimbursement. So there is a way to do it, but most of us, I would bet, are actually receiving the reimbursement, as the good member from Washakie County said, receiving the per diem, as the good member from Washakie County says, not the reimbursement that people keep talking about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Steinmetz, you want to take us home?
Yes, I think we were in the business of droning today, and so I'll try and take us home. But good debate. We've learned a lot about lodging tax, sales tax, all of those good issues. And like I said, this was just an idea. So vote your conscience on it. However, the last speaker did make my point for me that if you are turning in your receipts to be reimbursed, you can do that. That's an option right now, and some people are doing that because the expenses are far outweighing the per diem that we're getting. And so I do think that this bill would have an effect. The other part of it, when I started this whole debate, was two ways to save money. That was one, if you're being reimbursed, not to have to pay the sales tax on that. And then secondly, was you know, a way to not increase our per diem rates. So those were my 2 points. I think they were well made by everyone in this body, and I appreciate the good debate and your views on this bill. And I'd call for the question.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Beitman's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 103, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. No. Senate File 103 did not pass. Of course.
You gotta ask for it because you're gonna have a standing roll. Gotta have a roll call.
Oh, you do? To kill it right now.
Okay.
Well, in committee of the whole, you can't have a roll call.
Yes, you do to kill a bill. Yes, you have to.
Okay.
Has to be rolled.
Okay. All those in favor, please rise. All those opposed, please rise. Pursuant to SR 6-5. Nine ayes, 19 noes. Pursuant to SR 6-5, having failed a standing division vote, a roll call vote is required. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Roll call on Senate File 103. Anderson? No. Baldwin? No. Barlow? No. Beitman? Aye. Boner? No. Bouchard? No. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? No. Dockstetter? No. Ellis? No. French? Aye. Murphy? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Kinsky? No. Cole? No. Landon? No. Larson? No. McEwen?
No.
No. Nethercott? No. Pappas? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? No. Steinmetz? Aye. President Driscoll excused. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 103, 7 ayes, 23 noes, 1 excused.
Senate File 103, having failed a roll call vote pursuant to SR 6-5A, is deemed indefinitely postponed. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 97.
Senate File 97, Education Trust Fund Transfer, sponsored by Senator Hicks, an act relating to the Wyoming Education Trust Fund, was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinsky, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinsky, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Kinsky?
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 97. And for an explanation of this finely crafted, honed piece of legislation, I will turn to Senator Hicks. I did move it, yep.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is a pretty simple bill, but I want everybody to understand the consequences, and I'll give a little history. So we have what we call the Education Trust. And this was established, and what the bill does is it takes the corpus of the Education Trust and the earnings account from this and shifts this into the School Foundation Program account, or the Common School account corpus. So we're moving the corpus from one account into another. That's what the bill does. And it moves it from one education account into another education account, permanent corpus of the School Foundation Program. Mr. Chairman, so let me explain why this bill is contemplating doing this. So the Education Trust Fund was set up in 1991. And there's probably only one member here that could even recollect why they even set it up. There was not any money put into the account until 1997, and at that point in time, the source of the funding from them came from a negotiated easement agreement with the Express Pipeline Partnership in 1996. The state received $5 million, and they used that to put money in the account, Mr. Chairman. But what I want to do is you all should have a handout on your desk here, Senate File 97. This is the actual statutory component. So under 21-2-101, the trust fund was established. So grab that. This is 1991 they set this up. 1996 in the session laws, they found $5 million that they put it in the account. But here's what I want to draw your attention to is subsection C. And it says, until the balance of the account established under subsection A reaches $50 million, the governor shall annually recommend that the legislature specific amount of revenue sources for $10 million until the account gets to $50 million. I've been here for quite a while, and I never have ever seen a governor recommend that we put $10 million into this account. It's never achieved what it was set up to do in 1991. It just sits there, it generates a little bit of money. It funds an innovative grant program from the school districts. All this does is moving one amount of money that's dedicated to education and putting it over into the school corpus. Why would we want to do that? Mr. Chairman, to simplify the budget. That's the first reason. The second thing that it does is it will increase the return on the investments. So we had a big discussion here earlier about consolidating. These funds are invested in Pool A, which generates a very low rate of return. That's a more liquid pool. They move into the corpus of the Common School Permanent Land Fund. You can look at the fiscal note. They anticipate about a 5% return on the dollar there. The money that this will generate will still spin off into the foundation program and used to fund school districts. All 48 school districts, Mr. Chairman. So I asked the staff to go back and look at the utilization of this program. And if we looked at the last 5 years, only about 40% of the school districts participated in the Innovative Grants Program. And out of that 40% of the utilization, 4 school districts used over 50% of the total funds. By shifting this into the corpus of the Common School Permanent Land Fund, that $5 million goes in there. It's going to generate interest every year that goes into the School Foundation Program that benefits all 48 school districts in the state of Wyoming. That's what the bill does. The money stays with education. It stays in the corpus. It generates earnings for the School Foundation Program to the benefit of all 48 school districts in the state of Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the question I have is how we can transfer an inviolate fund. The B provision provides that this is an inviolate corpus fund, and it looks like it's at $5 million. If the corpus is inviolate, how do we transfer it to a different fund, or was this no, I don't think this was constitutionally inviolate fund creation by the legislature. I assume this is, or, well, I guess I'll ask the question and see what the answer is.
Mr. Chairman, I think the good minority floor leader was on track. This is not a constitutionally established inviolate trust. So even though it says it's inviolate, no past legislature can bind the hands of this legislature. This is what we would call a statutory trust. So this is perfectly acceptable and legal to go ahead and move this, even though back in 91, it says it's inviolate. It's just a statute. By doing this, we've just overturned that statute, which we're more than entitled to do with a majority vote. So that's the difference between these. Again, Mr. Chairman, if there's no questions, I'd call for the question.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll just weigh in with it. I get it now. I agree. It isn't constitutionally inviolate, so it makes sense that it's perfectly transferable. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, on and for the bill, and further, the ones that are inviolate, other than the things like the permanent school fund, long established. If you look at section 20, they're higher education trust funds, scholarship funds there. Those are constitutionally protected, but this is not included.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor?
I just want to add this one thing, quoting the 40th President of the United States. I won't say his name, but known as the Gipper. He says, government programs once launched never disappear. A government program is the nearest thing to eternal life we'll ever see on this earth. So vote aye and prove the Gipper wrong. Thank you.
Oh, 97 has passed committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration.
It's on.
Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I have privilege of the floor?
You may.
Ladies and gentlemen, just letting you know, the Transportation Committee is probably going to head on down. We've got a long list of bills here, and we want to make sure that we do some good work here. So with the permission of the Majority Leader, I think we're going to go ahead and head out. Notice to the public, we'll be starting our meeting here in about 10 minutes in room number 2 in the extension, and we'll go ahead and do our work as a committee. So I just want to make that announcement.
Here you go. Read the bill in, please.
Senate File 100, Designation of Spouses, Revocation upon Divorce or Annulment, sponsored by Senator Barlow, an act relating to wills and probate, was referred to Committee Number 1, which turned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Barlow? Senator Landon.
Green means
I'm having
go.
a problem
Thank you.
with that in you today, aren't
Thank
I,
you, Mr.
Senator Landon?
Chairman.
I'd like to apologize. It's not on purpose.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have to visit. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. When the committee of the whole rises to report, I hope it'll do so with a due pass recommendation. I would move that it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 100, designation of spouses, revocation upon divorce or annulment. And for an explanation of this good Senate file, I would ask that you call on Senator Barlow.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So members of the body, I'd ask for your favorable look upon Senate File 100. As maybe start with a little bit of context, as some of you have probably heard, and maybe it's happened in your own families or in your neighborhood, where someone has gone through the unfortunate life circumstances of divorce, and sometimes, of course, annulments. And then there's an accident or a tragedy, and one of the spouses die. Well, if all those instruments that they had agreed to take care of were not taken care of when that spouse passed, then oftentimes the now divorced spouse may get property, may get accounts, may get insurance payouts, etc., that you would wonder if the decedent would have wanted them to have. And thus, as there are actual cases, the children are denied the benefits, and it may not have even been a step parent that gets the benefits and not the children of the decedent, et cetera. So what this bill does is it's really a clarification, a cleaning up of existing Wyoming statute. If you look at the back of the bill, there's a repealer. That repealer basically deals with just probate type items. This deals with many other types of instruments. And so what this bill, and I can assure you, I'm not an attorney. This was brought to me by attorneys who have dealt with this and trying to get to some resolution. So with the bill, and I'll just walk through the bill quickly, it's new language replacing, as I said, and expanding on the repealer, which we'll get to at the end. And so first thing it does, and this is quite interesting in the testimony we have, there is no place in statute, Wyoming, those entire green books that we all think have all the answers, there is no other place where divorce or annulment is defined. And actually the department which takes care of health came to the testimony and was actually quite excited that they had actually got to now know what divorce and annulment meant, so that when they got requests for vital records, they would know whether that person was actually eligible to receive them. So I guess if there's such thing as a tertiary benefit, we found it that was brought to our attention this morning. So anyway, all of this definitions, many of the others are ones that I think are very straightforward, plain language. You'll see the governing instrument, page 2, line 16. These are revocable instruments. And so these were instruments that if the person were alive and had known or had intended to change, they could. Page 3, of course, further outlines revocable. And then when you get to the bottom of page 3, line 16, then you start talking about the express terms. So this law would not take effect if in the express terms of the divorce decree or in the document itself said, no, I still want my ex-spouse to get these benefits, period. So they were, and this goes back to the tenancy in common and all the discussion, some of the discussion we had this morning. So if they made the designation that they had an amicable, parting of the ways, they could still transfer, or there could still be benefits gained to that ex-spouse, but it would be explicit in the document. And then when you talk to page 4, talks about the types of different instruments that would be property, appointment, a governing that confers special powers. Maybe that's a power of attorney or a durable medical power, and then or something that nominates somebody in the divorced person's family. And then you get to, I think, the crux, and then what you're doing is you're severing the interests so that they're no longer this man and wife issue. Now it's interests in common, and that's on the top of page 5. And certainly I'm not the expert. There are folks in this room that can talk about those nuances and definitions. I think one of the important things is, and I want to be clear with the body, that there was a banking industry there, and they want to just, they're taking a hard look at it. They're interested, they think it will, but there's a little bit of nuance, and they've provided some suggestions, and on second reading, we'll hope to have something ready that addresses their concern. Is there are benefits that are paid on death, but if they don't know the individual rights may have been extinguished, how would they don't want to be held liable for doing something that they're obligated to do, but would not have knowledge not to do it. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about that. So I think the rest of the bill kind of works through the mechanics of it. And section 2 is the repealer, 22.6.118, and this is fairly straightforward language in effect but it only has to do, the current statute only has to do with those items that I understand to be probatable. So this expands, this is kind of some language that's come from other states, surrounding states, including the state to the north of us, seems to be working well. And like I said, we're looking at some language that'll clean up that for our banking institutions to give them some protection from maybe paying when they would not have known otherwise. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to stand for questions, and if they're very tough, I will send a lifeline to some of the attorneys who are also on this bill. Thank you.
So a husband and wife are having breakfast. And the husband says, "What would you like for our anniversary?" And she said, "I'd like a divorce." Says, "I was hoping not to spend that much." Work with me, people.
Senator
Thank you, Mr.
Hutchings.
Chair, I was trying to follow, and I think I need further explanation from maybe one of the other members, excuse me. No offense should be taken from one of the co-sponsors that deals with law, if they could. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good Senator, so oftentimes what happens is people get life insurance policies when they start their families and their marriages are good, and then 20 years later, it's not quite so great, and they get divorced, and they forget about that life insurance policy. Or maybe they do, but they just got divorced, and there's a lot going on. They moved into a new location, they're transferring their new bank accounts, a lot of things to do, and that life insurance policy really isn't a priority. And so the beneficiary designation of their wife 20 years ago is still on it. And it stays that way for a period of years. And then fast forward a couple years later, that person remarries and then dies. They still have a life insurance policy with the ex-wife's name as the beneficiary. Not what was intended by the decedent, by the death of the husband. But ex-wife gets it. As you can imagine, this causes a great level of discord. And so this particular bill draft addresses that concern in addition to others, but this is a big one, where someone fails to update their documents post-divorce, where they have identified a spouse at the time as being a beneficiary to something that they possess. And this would resolve that automatically by law. So even if they failed to update it post-divorce, that ex-spouse would not be the beneficiary of those accounts unless, and there is a provision, and this does happen, where the divorced couple still wants an ex-spouse to be a beneficiary, at which point that person needs to take the affirmative action of updating that beneficiary designation post-divorce, right? So the reverse is true. Most commonly, people don't update these documents after a divorce. And so we're protecting their interests and their actions based on most commonly what people do post-divorce, and also recognizing that these are two separate people under the law. And those kind of husband and wife beneficiary rights no longer exist upon a divorce.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that explanation. That helps. But the question I have, and I haven't delved into the bill, so help me out a little bit here. Does this go far beyond life insurance? I'm assuming it's retirement accounts and how about Social Security benefits and all of these other components that they're easily overlooked as far as changing beneficiaries. So I'm assuming it covers all of those instruments out there, just for clarification for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does cover all revocable instruments, and that's defined in the bill on page 3, lines 4 through 14. And generally what that means is any type of document or instrument that allows you to designate a beneficiary. That is generally the concept there.
Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're kind of assuming or taking on the power from a divorced spouse that may die by saying, well, if you die and you had a life insurance policy, any benefits for your ex-spouse, we're going to revoke that because you're remarried. Is that fair to do that? Because do we know that that person really did not intend that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of clarifications. In Social Security, there are some provisions that allow an ex-spouse to collect some Social Security, and those are in federal law, and I don't think we can touch those. So there will be, the ex-spouse will have some rights generally in the Social Security area that we can't extinguish. In response to the previous senator, what we're essentially assuming, if we pass this, is that in general, the divorced spouse will not want their ex to be a beneficiary. But we recognize that although that will be the most frequent case, there will be cases where that's not the desired outcome. And we give clearly in this bill, give the divorced spouse the right to say, okay, my ex continues to get life insurance policy, this one, and continues to get this or that or the other thing, but they have to actively designate. And Mr. Chairman, that makes all kinds of sense to me, that the default position is where we think most people are going to be. And you've got to take an action to have it happen is where the minority will want to go. And both sides, I think that's the best we can do in protecting all the parties involved on and for the bill.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It should also just be noted that currently the law states that if you have a will designating your spouse that you then divorce and you don't update, that your will is actually negated. So the statutes already state that they'll automatically update your will for you to recognize that your spouse is no longer your spouse as identified in that will and is no longer a beneficiary of your probate estate. And so your probate estate is those types of assets that you own upon your death that aren't necessarily governed by a governing instrument or a document. And this bill attempts to address that gap in our law that does not automatically update those governing instruments outside of your probate estate.
Are you ready for the question?
I need a whiteboard.
All those in favor of Senator Hicks' motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 0100, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Senate File 0100 has passed Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 8.
Senate File 8, Essential Subsidy Payments to Behavioral Health Centers, sponsored by Senator Baldwin, an act relating to public health and safety. Was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Aye, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, and Dockstader. No, Senator Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Baldwin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, to do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 8, Essential Subsidy Payments to Behavioral Health Centers. And it really has nothing to do with this bill, but I heard a quote at lunch when I was from an old senator that used to be in here, used to be up here in front. Those of you who served with him know that he had to stand in front of his desk, turn around and talk to us. He didn't talk to us a lot, but one of the quotes we heard from him, I believe, was a good senator that's a little more small in stature, much like this senator that spoke, said, "You know, folks, this bill's not as bad as it looks." The good news is this bill doesn't look bad, and I'll give you the explanation of the bill and we can get through it. This bill comes to you not from a committee, but from a committee. There's a group out there working on the behavioral health remodel, if you recall, 2 years ago that we passed in this body and on the other end of the hall, where we're taking and redoing the entire behavioral health and the behavioral health centers and their models of payment and the way that they deliver services. This is the first thing that you're going to see from that committee, as well as the mental health committee. This is the first piece. It's a small piece. There will be more. There were some other things done that didn't require legislation, but this is the first piece that requires legislation. And the meat of this bill, if you go to page 2, the big meat of this bill comes around. Previously, service had been divided by the mental health centers, which had started at 18 centers, I believe we were told in committee, are now down to 10. They've consolidated, and some of these mental health centers or behavioral health centers now take up huge geographic areas. And if you look on page 2, the old statute said the service needs would be determined by healthcare providers within the 35-mile radius. That didn't work out very well now. Now that you have enormous areas within 35 miles of the behavioral health center, sometimes doesn't encompass something, particularly in our rural areas. And I use my county, one of my counties, as an example. One behavioral health center covers essentially four different counties. It covers an enormous hundreds of miles. And if we determine just within 35 miles of the center where that office is located, all those little communities out on the edge get left out. So a determination from that committee was to take that and let the behavioral health centers make that recommendation where the service or needs, and as it says in there, service needs as demonstrated by the behavioral health center. And that alleviates that problem. We can disperse those services out to more areas. As I say, you're going to see more changes as we go forward with this process. This subcommittee, this task force has met, I don't know how many times, but it's a lot. It's represented by stakeholders. It's represented by all those with a dog in the fight, behavioral health groups, the Department of Health, legislative folks, and it's a big group. They've met a lot, and they will meet a lot. They have, I believe, 18 months left to go that they're going to be working on this. So you will hear more from this down the road. But I would encourage an aye vote on this very small piece of legislation and get it moving forward. I stand for questions.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I see this as permissive by the Department of Health, but I'm just wondering, where's the source of funding that they would use for the subsidy payment? Are those federal dollars, or are they existing in a program and we're reprogramming? Just trying to understand the nature of where the dollars are coming from and then how they're dispatched. And do we already have I'm assuming there's already other people that are utilizing the funds in this program. So just please an explanation on that.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So excellent question. So these are general funds that are a part of that agency's standard budget, and they are being distributed, as the good chairman of Labor Health said, to these entities, most of them private nonprofits around our state. One of them happens to be a hospital district that provides these services throughout this state. So they're existing funds within the debt, and all we've been trying to do is actually get understand better what services are needed, streamline the system, provide better access, and prioritize the populations. This has been an ongoing effort for 3 or 4 years, as the good chairman said, but it's coming out of existing funds. And really what we're trying to get is the best efficiency, the best services, the best access and results out of the existing funds we have in this process. I hope that answers the question, but it is general fund in the department standard budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I see the effective date is 2024. Can you explain why not 2023?
Senator Baldwin.
Jumping up, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason is, in order to put this into effect in the rules, not going to take a long time, but we wanted to give them enough time to get through, this, when we're done, by the time we're done, by the time that the office down the hall gets this bill signed, assuming that it passes, gives them plenty of time to get everything in order, get the rules in place. Not a big deal. They may be able to get it done, but this gives them some cushion to make sure we get it done all the way.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion when committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 08, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Senate File 08 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 0098.
Senate File 98, Education Certificate of Completion, sponsored by Senator Barlow, an act relating to education. Was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, Scott, and Steinmetz. Senator Scott, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of this bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I move in the committee of the whole rise and report it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 98 do pass. I yield to the sponsor, Senator Barlow, for an explanation of the Senate file.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So ladies and gentlemen, this Senate File 98 is a very quick read. What we're trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, is this came out at requests from school board members, from educators, after a recent conference, wanting to have more of a statewide, unified approach to how we recognize the achievements of children with disabilities who currently are not eligible, if they do not meet the graduation standards, to receive a diploma as their classmates would walking across the stage, etc. Now, some districts of our 48 districts do provide a certificate. But the genesis of this discussion is, of course, these children, our children, in our schools, our kids' classmates, and some of them maybe our own kids, they don't get counted the same when we talk about success in school. In fact, they get counted as dropouts because they did not meet their graduation requirements to receive a diploma. So that in itself is problematic. Unfortunately, we can't fix that in this bill, but this bill begins a process where we can fix it, and there can be an alternate diploma process, and they will no longer be considered dropouts, and then we can get away from this a dropout rate, I would argue, that is false, and we can get to something that's more meaningful. So, but truly, this bill is to recognize the achievements, the real achievements that these students, our educators, and the families have gone through for many years. As you know, they're eligible for service up to the time that they're 21 years of age. And so I think it's something very straightforward that we're trying to do here. So it only has two parts of the bill. One is requiring the State Board of Education to establish requirements by rule for students with disabilities to issue this high school certificate of completion. The second part is that school districts comply with that and report those certificates to the State Board of Education. Effective immediately. There was some thought about actually going retroactively and saying, you could actually do this for students that already completed. And if you're from many communities, you know some of these folks. I know some of these folks. In fact, I still know folks I graduated with many years ago who did not achieve graduation, but who were there and probably some of the most motivated of my classmates to participate and be a part of that life that we had at that time. So I would ask for a favorable consideration and stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What an incredibly great bill. And I just commend the committee for doing this. I wish it was retroactive. A really good piece of legislation, and I'm so glad that it got through and it's on the floor. Thank you.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree that this is a really important thing that we need to be working toward. Along those lines, I guess my concern is, was there any discussion in working on this bill about timelines of when the state board shall complete their work and a timeline for duties of the boards of trustees of our 48 districts to actually go forth with doing this? Having served on the education committee, I've seen these efforts come and go where we put something that's really great on the books and then they languish, and then years later we say, well, whatever happened? And then we have to go out and ask all 48 districts, how's that coming along? And sometimes they adopt policies, sometimes they don't. And so that's my concern, Mr. Chairman, is just more discussion on whether or not it'd be appropriate to put some timelines in there.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in visiting with both the executive of education for the state over the department who deals with this, they felt like they were going to get right on it. And visiting with the school board members and that I've interacted with of 3 different school districts and 2 superintendents, certainly they're from my neck of the woods, they felt that there was such an interest in this that I guess I am relatively confident there is already momentum to do this. As I said, they can already do that independently. What we're trying to do is actually maybe standardize it a little bit more so we can actually understand what's going on in the state and then move toward that next step where we're actually not being discounted, not just the state, but these students' achievements being discounted at the federal level. And I think I heard the chairman of the education committee says we shouldn't give a X about what the feds think, but that's still the system we work in. So I feel comfortable that they will move forward with this in an expeditious manner. Certainly, we've also seen split effective dates to give time for rules and then implementation, but I guess I feel comfortable that, with an effective date before the next graduation season of 2024, this will be in place. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Scott's motion when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 98, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Senate File 98 has passed committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 79. Will you please read the Senate file in?
Senate File 79, Plan of Safe Care Newborns, an act relating to public health and safety, sponsored by Senator Baldwin. It was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Baldwin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, they do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 79, Plan of Safe Care Newborns. There is an amendment, if I can get that read in.
Senate File 79, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 12, delete.
Thank you. I will explain the bill and work the amendment in and then move the amendment, but we'll just talk about the bill first and then do the amendment. This bill, fellow senators, comes as a result, if you'll remember last year, we had a bill where we talked about punishment and the fines and jail sentences, et cetera, that should be expected from a mother who has a newborn that is born into a drug addiction situation. It was quite a controversial bill. I know all of us spent a lot of time talking with people out in the lobby et cetera. That bill ultimately failed because a lot of the discussion had a lot to do with, we were going to discourage mothers. Mothers not coming in to have good OB care because they were fearful of the penalties that might be involved. That is where this bill, the genesis of this bill is. This bill is probably as close as a kumbaya moment as our committee will ever have. I expected at any moment this morning that we might all hold hands and sing. It didn't happen, and we won't do that here today either because nobody in here knows how to sing. This bill goes through, and what it does, just briefly, without getting too in depth, this bill, if you look at the definitions on page 2, it talks about the early intervention and educational program. It's a program that provides services not just for the infants, but for the mother as well. And that's important. And we're worried about the children with developmental delays and disabilities. The patient care team, and the amendment will come in here, but it means a team of healthcare providers who provide medical care services to a patient. And the final definition is a plan of safe care means a plan designed to ensure the safety and well-being of an infant with prenatal substance use exposure following the infant's release from the care of a healthcare provider by addressing the health and substance use treatment needs of the infant and the affected family or caregiver. Now, if you go deeper into the bill, it explains how that happens when the infant's born and identified. One of the concerns about this that I've heard was it was a problem with the Fourth Amendment. It doesn't change any of those discoveries of finding out when an infant has a problem with addiction or exposure. We have all the same reporting requirements that we do now. It doesn't involve randomly testing every infant born. It's those infants that come in with a problem that is possibly due to a drug addiction or substance abuse problem that we can identify it then to help that patient out. It just goes further in treating that infant, but goes further beyond that. And you'll notice on the bottom of 3, it also talks about alcohol exposure. But it helps develop a plan of safe care for the infant and for the infant's mother. One of the other concerns that was brought up is addressed on the bottom of page 3. The plan of safe care shall take into account whether the infant's prenatal drug exposure occurred as a result of medication-assisted treatment or medication prescribed for the mother by a healthcare provider, and whether the infant's mother is or will be actively engaged in ongoing substance use disorder treatment that would mitigate the future risk of harm. And the final part of this bill just goes into reporting requirements. If it's felt that there's a danger to the infant, if there's felt that there will be an ongoing danger to that infant, the same reporting requirements we have right now. And we did talk about this. This isn't just for the healthcare providers. Everyone, in fact, has a mandate that if you see something that you believe some infant is in danger, you should be exposing that. You should be reporting that. And I think that's an important concept. With that in mind, let's go ahead and look at the amendment real quick and just tell you what it does. If you look at that amendment, the first part on page 2, line 12, and this was brought to us as a concern that all the infants may not be born in a hospital to a physician. We have midwives. We have infants that are being born in birthing centers. It may not be when the infant is born at all that this need is recognized. It may be in the hospital visit. It may be in an office visit when they come in for a well child care. It could happen at any point. For that reason, it doesn't necessarily involve a physician. So if you'll see on line 12, we deleted the term physicians and inserted healthcare providers, which in statute, that's well-defined. Physician assistants, advanced practice nurses, midwives, etc. So it replaces that and makes that more clear. And then on page 2, line 21, we inserted before when, prenatally. It was felt by the committee members that prenatally there's identified a possible need when that child's born, that there may be a care team needed, that we just added that in. So it's not just when the infant's born, but if that's recognized prenatally. And the final part of that amendment is on page 3, line 2, after parents inserting families. It was recognized in the committee that a number of the families today and a number of the infants are not necessarily with a mother and a father in the traditional family sense that a lot of us think of. A lot of kids are with grandparents, they're with uncles, they're with whomever. And we just wanted the families included when this plan of care is developed, that other family members may be included as well. And with that, I would move the amendment and ask for your favorable vote on that standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 79. Thank you.
Are you ready for the question? All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion to adopt the Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 79, please say aye. Opposed? The motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 79 has passed. We are back on the bill. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 79, say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 79 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I move the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
You have heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carried.
The reading clerk will read the Committee of the Whole report.
Mr. Vice President, your Committee of the Whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate File 35, do pass. Senate File 91, do pass. Senate File 66, do pass. Senate File 22, do pass. Senate File 34, do pass. Senate File 103 failed to pass Committee of the Whole and was indefinitely postponed. Senate File 97, do pass. Senate File 100, do pass. Senate File 8, do pass. Senate File 98, do pass. Senate File 79, do pass amended. Signed, Senator McEwen, Chairman.
Senator McEwen.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole report is approved.
Having moved for adoption of the Committee of the Whole report, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. The report has been adopted. Do we have any messages or any reports? Okay, we have a report.
January 18, 2023, Mr. President, your Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred Senate File 53, Wyoming National Guard Medical Insurance Premiums, respectfully report same back to the Senate with the recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Guru, Anderson, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move we stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Thursday, January 19th.
Announcements. Senator Case.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. I previously gave the announcement at noon, but I just want to remind the committee and members of the public, we are starting at 7 o'clock tomorrow, 7 a.m. That's corporations, your loyal, faithful Committee 7.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Vice President, your Senate Joint Appropriations will meet tomorrow, Thursday, January 19th at 8 a.m. in State Capitol E301. The committee will be considering two topics, 23 LSO 407, Formal Draft 1, General Government Appropriations, and 23 LSO 510, Working Draft .6. Another announcement, Mr. Vice President, your Senate Appropriations Committee will meet Thursday, January 19th upon noon recess in W113 to hear the following bills. Senate File 85, State Funds Streamlining, Transfers and Distributions. That's a continuation from the 18th. Senate File 23, Treatment Courts transfer to judicial branch. Senate File 82, eligible water and sewer projects funding. Senate File 54, judges housing allowance. And Senate File 96, omnibus water bill planning and administration. Thank you.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Vice President, the Rules Committee Rules will be meeting in the State Capitol Room W110 and online at 5:50, 10 minutes after adjournment, to take up Senate File 61 Legislature per diem, Senate File 62 Legislator Healthcare 2.
Senator Ball, oh, sorry, please.
Mr. Vice President, your Rules Committee will also be meeting tomorrow, Thursday, January 19th at 5 p.m. in State Capitol Room E200 and online to review the Wyoming Manual of Legislative Procedures.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This is just an early heads up for your Labor Committee, who will be laboring Friday morning to hear 3 bills. We're going to shuffle the order a little bit. We're going to hear Senate File 65, compensation of local registrars repeal, followed by Senate Resolution, Joint Resolution 2, recognizing the service of Lester C. Hunt. And finally, we will hear Senate File 72, employees forced microchip implantation prohibited, and that will be at 8 a.m. on Friday in Connecting Room 6 and online.
Thank you. Just for all members of the Senate, the Appropriations Committee is, I'll be right with you. We're trying to move the re-referrals along as quickly as possible. And I'm trying also to post the re-referrals. It's not required, but as a courtesy to the Senate. But it's possible that we may get a re-referral and hustle it through, and it doesn't necessarily get posted. So just keep an eye on that. Senator French.
Yes, Mr. Vice President. Your Standing Committee number 5, Senate Agricultural, State, and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet Thursday, January 19th, 15 minutes upon adjournment in Capitol Extension Room W002 and online. The following bills will be considered. Senate File 28, Livestock Infectious Disease Control, Tribal Inclusion. Senate File 87, Natural Resource Funding, Large Project Threshold Increase. Senate File 102, Food Freedom Act Amendment. Senate File 124, Foreign Ownership of Agricultural Land.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't see my chairwoman here for Committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources. They will be meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. to hear Senate File 41, Senate File 122, Senate File 106, and Senate File 33 as time permits.
Any further announcements? You've heard the majority floor leader's motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? No. The Senate will stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.